fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and after a frustratingly slow start, the D's engineered a 10-goal turnaround to secure a finals berth and propel themselves into second spot on the ladder. Our fate is now in our own hands. Win our remaining 3 home and away games, and we could be playing a home final at the MCG, where we rue the missed opportunity of banking some extra percentage points. Joining me tonight to discuss just that is longtime Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Binman. Good evening to all our Demonland listeners. Isn't it truly amazing? You know, a short time ago, I thought we'd be happy to hang on to a 4th place. Even Andy's MFCSS was working out ways that we could possibly miss out on the finals. And now all the other teams around us keep failing. None more so than Port and Collingwood. How wonderful is that? And we'll even forgive Brisbane for beating Freo because that's also beneficial to us as well with the draft pick that they've gifted us. So, yeah, as you said, we now sit in second place and it's all in our own hands from here on in.
It is remarkable because I really was looking for ways we could get out of the or miss the finals, and it turns out that we're in the finals now, so we can't drop out of the 8. Can we drop out of the 4? Who knows? Let's wait and see. Also joining us tonight to dissect our victory on the Apple Isle is Binman. Good evening, Binman.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And look, I don't normally pump up my tyres, but I predicted this a few weeks back on the show that we would be second. I could see your doubtful face, Andy, and I pushed against the collective wisdom. But a few weeks ago, even I was not thinking that we'd be second after this round. However, I did predict that we'd be second after this round in last week's show. So I'm busily patting myself on the back here in Chateau Binman.
Well, I must say I was doing all the ladder predictors permutations a few weeks back, and I one of the predictions I did showed that we could be in second place at this stage, but I never in my wildest dreams thought that it could actually happen. Who would have thought Port would have lost 4 games on the trot?
I do.
I know you
I
did.
agree with you there, Binman.
Who would have thought Brisbane would have dropped a couple of games, Collingwood 2 games, so even Collingwood's in reach now.
Well, that was the one. That was the Suns rolling them that really was the big one, because that means it doesn't matter whether they beat the Pies. And do we dare to dream finish top? I don't think we'll finish top, and I expect Collingwood will rebound and beat the Cats this weekend. But there's on Demonland, it's gone from where the best we could hope for is to play Collingwood at the G, by finishing 4th to dreams of potentially finishing top. But, second would do me nicely, I think.
You know what usually happens when we start getting ahead of ourselves and talk about top spot.
Yeah, I don't.
No, tell us about it, Andy.
You don't want to hear it. You know my story.
But it was the perfect round of footy in some respects, and it would have been great if Brisbane got rolled. But even that game, they were ahead on percentage before that unbelievable goal from Fredericks. So we wouldn't have been second. Not that it actually matters, apart from psychologically, it looks fantastic to see a second on the ladder. But if not for that final goal that Freo kicked, they were ahead on percentage on the live ladder.
I don't think so. I think, didn't they need at the end, like Brisbane, as the scores got higher, because obviously the higher the scores are, the more more they needed to win by to get up. But I thought we needed 17. They needed to win at that stage or late in the game. They needed a 17-point win to get above us on percentage. That was my understanding. But anyway.
You might be right, but my story sounds much more exciting.
It does. And that was a beautiful goal. He's a really
And it's all irrelevant because we've got 3 games to go yet. So.
Yeah. Exactly.
But the other game that was awesome too was the Port Geelong game was almost the perfect result, because I actually didn't think Geelong were going to win that. Port had all the momentum, and it was a terrific result, one, because Port lost and we jumped above them, and it's going to make it really tricky for Port. They've got a tough game this week against the Giants. They'll really test them, I reckon. But it also showed that Geelong really are a fair way behind, the pace, I reckon. So that's why I think Collingwood will probably give them a touch-up next week, even with their sort of outs and
because Port
they're travelling, because Geelong looks slow, really.
And Port had a lot of outs. I mean,
that was ridiculous. They had on the eve of it.
Yes, that's what I mean.
Came out
because their outs before that was sort of the Geelong had their.
Well, they had Lear out and they had Jones out.
Yeah, and Geelong had lost Blitzarves and Hawkins, which were two massive outs. But then you add all those ones Port on the eve of the game.
Particularly Finland, that's huge for them. And
Dixon and whatever. So
Dixon, that's right. And they lost one of their Mackenzie, one of their players during the game. So they were down one of their key players. It was actually a good performance by them, I thought. Port, having said that, I had to laugh at Ken Hinkley laughing basically on the ground afterwards. Like, it struck me as he was trying to pump up that win just because he hasn't signed yet. And, he hasn't re-signed with the club, and he was all, this is a fantastic result. But the facts are that's the fourth loss in a row, and, the history shows of the last 10 flags, basically the team that are rolling come in those last 4 or 5 games coming into the finals are the ones that, go on to win the flag. And there's actually a really interesting discussion that's popping up. I'm not sure if you guys have noticed it, about the potential of whether the Pies are doing a pre-final loading, which might explain how lethargic they were, because they did. They looked off the pace against the Hawks right from the get-go, I thought. So, but if that were to be the case, that would be an amazingly big risk to take, because you just want to be playing your best football at this time of year. And who's playing their best footy? The D's are playing our best footy.
Enough of all these other sides. This is the Demonland podcast.
That's right.
Andy, get on to it and tell us how good we were.
Well, we will get to that shortly, but first we have a bit of housekeeping to do. Each week I ask our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. We absolutely love the feedback and we'll read it out on the show. The 5 stars really does help boost the podcast and get more people listening. Delightfully Insightful writes, best D's podcast out there. Love the Demonland podcast. I listen every week. It's the most in-depth analysis of the MFC with high-quality discussion and different opinions. Listening has also improved my game day experience. I have specific tactics that I'm looking for, and I understand the roles that certain players execute. My MFC SS has calmed a little bit. Thanks to the team for your work. It's really appreciated. Well, thanks for that. Delightfully Insightful. Great review. Boof writes, love it. Great pod. Been listening for years. Keep it up, Andy, George and Binman. Thorough and entertaining. Love getting my weekday fix here. Come on, D's. Well, thank you, Boof, for the 5-star review. Jono says, red and blue brilliance. Biased? Yes. Detailed? Does 2 hours plus detailed analysis float your boat? Entertaining? If you bleed red and blue, then very. Insightful? As clear as any Demon's crystal decanter. Weekly MFC SS inoculation? Grateful. Best football analysis going around? Absolutely. Well, thanks for that, Jono. What a great review. Love it. Keep the feedback coming. Please give us a 5-star on Apple Podcasts, and please don't forget to click the write a review link and actually write a review as well as giving the 5 stars, and we'll definitely read it out on the show. If you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or Threads, and you want to leave us feedback or post a question or a comment for the show, you can post under our podcast post each week. Just slide into our DMs. We won't read out your full name on the show. We have a few reviews and comments from Facebook this week of people who did DM us. Trent S. writes, absolutely love the podcast. Binman, thanks for almost getting me a $12 multi of Adelaide into Melbourne 40 plus. Getting very excited with the form we are in at the moment. Thanks, Trent. Of course, the Demonland podcast and its hosts are not responsible for any gambling losses, but we will require a cut of all the winnings, so please gamble responsibly. David Y. writes, fantastic podcast, detailed and informative. I've learned heaps about the modern game, pressure acts and loading, to name a few. From a former Melbourne Demons player starved of worthwhile AFL assessments. Well, thank you, David. Thanks for the feedback and thank you for listening. If you want to chat with other Demon fans and you've never been to our forum, head on over to demonland.com and you sign up and you can chat with other Demons fans from across Australia and around the world. It's completely free. And in addition to being able to post questions and comments for the show, like we're going to have a bit later on, there's also multiple topics and threads discussing all things Demons related. So you can join up and join in on the conversation. It is far superior to anything you're going to read on social media when it comes to reading about the Demons. If you'd like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics that we're going to talk about, then please give us a call on 0390163666. That's 0390163666. I'll answer. I'll put you on mute. I'll bring you on when there's a break in the conversation. During the week, you can call that number and leave us a voice message, and we'll play it on the show. If you're listening live, come join us in the chat room. Head on over to demonland.com/podcast. We're live every Monday, so if you want to listen to the show live, head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at 8:30 p.m. Now, in addition to being able to download the show on Apple, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud, or your preferred podcasting app, the Demonland podcast is now available to be watched and listened to on YouTube. Just search for Demonland Podcast to find our channel. You'll be able to view the podcast with our cartoon likenesses displayed when each of us are talking. Those caricatures were created by the very talented artist Sports Berserk, who specialises in drawing the caricatures of footy players. You can check out his work on Facebook and Instagram. Just search for Sports Berserk on those platforms, and there should be a link to his online store where you can purchase some of his artwork that he's created. He's a hardcore Demons fan, and he has lots of artwork of D's players available for sale. So please support our fellow D's fans by giving Sports Berserk a follow on social media and buying some of his excellent work. So we're on YouTube. Next stop, boys, TikTok. We'll just need to condense the podcast into 10-second increments and perhaps come up with some viral dance or challenge to engage with a whole new demographic. So
that's it. I'm out of here.
George, I don't think TikTok is for you.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
It's a platform, George, that the young people quite enjoy with using videos to tell a story.
Yes.
Yes. Well, let's get into the match wrap-up. We've chatted enough about other teams and done our housekeeping. So, well, after the past few weeks of some very close games and some heart-stopping moments in matches, all I wanted was a nice cruisy game where I could relax without my blood pressure rising and without getting the high heart rate alerts on my watch. Well, I didn't get any of those concerning health alerts this week, but I did come away from the match with a very unpleasant stress headache. And with percentage needed to be gained and a top 2 spot up for grabs, it was extremely frustrating that the D's did not appear to come out switched on. And despite kicking the first goal from an incredible, almost impossible kick from Cozzy tight on the boundary, the Demons found themselves 26 points down at the first break. And people wonder why I have an acute case of MFCSS poisoning. This condition was not alleviated as the Kangaroos kicked the first goal of the second quarter, taking a 33-point lead. Now, for all my playing up of my MFCSS, and I guess for any new and confused listeners, that's an acronym for Melbourne Football Club Supporter Syndrome. It was coined over a decade ago on Demonland for the veil of negativity that pervades the thoughts of many Demons fans, myself included, that nothing good will ever happen to the Ds. And of course, a premiership came and we assumed that would be the end of the dreaded MFCSS, but some things never seem to die, as my co-host will attest to. And so for all my playing up of my MFCSS on this show, I assure you it's not as bad in real life. Well, so I thought, but early in this match, with what was on the line, that MFCSS was in overdrive. The lack of pressure, the poor decisions, the poor disposals, it was simply infuriating for me. And I get that it's an even competition, and we saw what 16th place Hawthorn did to the media darlings of Collingwood. But to not come out switched on, and this was somewhat confirmed by post-match when he said, we were just being soft, to be honest. We weren't cracking in at all. And for me, that's just unacceptable. But from that point on, the Demons did pile on 14 goals to 5 to run out 32-point winners. The 10-goal turnaround and the securing of second place for now, only somewhat taking the edge off the migraine that was formed as a result of some teeth gnashing and fist clenching. Sadly, the wind was soured by the injury to Harrison Petty. It's devastating for Harry, and I wish him a speedy recovery. We finally found a forward target that can lead, take contested marks, provides a strong forward target or bring the ball to ground, and most importantly, he can kick straight, and then it's cruelly taken away from us. So we wish him a speedy recovery. Fortunately for the Demons, scoring has not been an issue for us for much of the season, despite an unsettled forward line. Cozzy Pickett was electrifying, kicking 3 incredible goals. Nibbler 2 was crafty in front of goals, kicking 3. Chin Chandler kicked truly on 3 critical occasions. And I'd love to see more of that, exactly that from this mosquito fleet of ours. Jacob Van Rooyen's development continues nicely with 2 goals of his own, as well as 10 score involvement, which is great to see from young Roo. We just need to find him a new partner in crime, and we'll talk more about that shortly. After a slow start, our mids got well on top and controlled the contest. Gus led the way with 37 possessions and 13 contested. Track with 27 and 16 contested, as well as 2 goals, 3. Viney was his bullocking best once again with 26 and 12 contested. And what a block of games he has put together. Solo against Goldstein and Sherry. Max Gorn probably came out on top and had 30 hit-outs with 15 to advantage and taking 3 contested marks. On the wing, Lockie Hunter was superb with 33 possessions, 15 contested and 9 score involvements. By midway through the last quarter, Goody had seen enough and was comfortable to rest Max, Viney and Track for the last 8 minutes and change of the match. Lesson well learned from 2022. And the win and the small percentage boost was enough to secure our second spot for the time being. I would have liked a bigger win and the percentage boost that would have come with it, but the fact remains that we just need to keep winning to retain our spot, and hopefully we come out breathing fire in our remaining games, because at this point in the season you can't let your guard down lest you be dealt a knockout blow. George, your thoughts on the match? Anything you want to add?
That summed it up beautifully, and what I particularly liked about this match was resting those people in that last quarter. That once again, Max had shouldered the whole lot against both Sherry and Goldstein effectively, and while JVR put in a great hand helping him out, but resting those players will be absolutely critical. Hats off to Goody and the coaching team for that. Would have been frustrating, no doubt, for those particular players because they're such bulls all round, and having to get those sort of players off the field would have been problematic. But, it's a big advantage for us with a couple of weeks to go in the season and finals.
It's interesting, Andy, the different reactions to the game. I watched the game. My daughter actually had an open day at Monash University, and so I walked up to Notting Hill pub and watched it in my lonesome there. It was such a frustrating first quarter, but a lot of the stuff I've read on Demonland, and it was echoed by what you were just saying, that we came out soft, and we didn't really. I don't. That's not how I saw it live, and so I was really curious to check the stats and the data to see whether my sense was. And as you know, I've been a critic over the journey of David King, but I think he was spot on in that first quarter. Is the numbers were actually relatively strong for us in that first quarter. Contested possessions we were up. The inside 50s were 14 each. The difference was they scored 5-5 from their entries, while we only scored 1-3. It wasn't. It didn't actually look unlike a Melbourne. excuse me, unlike a Melbourne match. We didn't. Our numbers were tracking okay the way we would have liked them to. When they look at quarter time, the difference was our appalling disposal by foot. Absolutely appalling disposal. So it wasn't soft. It wasn't, notwithstanding Track's comments after the game. What they weren't is they weren't switched on. So there were 2 things there for me that were really important in that. I talked about the Suns Lions game the other week and about how difficult it is for teams. And I think we saw it again in the Hawthorn the Hawks Pies game, how difficult it is for teams who don't come switched on to switch back on and get going. So for me, it was such a frustrating first quarter and a half. But it wasn't because of our effort. It was because of our, again, it drives me nuts, our appalling foot skills. And for me, that's a mental thing. They weren't in the game mentally. They weren't switched on to the level. It's a real challenge coming up against the lower clubs. It happens all the time in terms of how to get at the right arousal levels and psychologically switched on. So it was a real game of, for me, like good and bad. The the good was our numbers were tracking right from the get-go. We ended up plus 30 for contested possessions, but we were up at the end of the first quarter. You wouldn't feel that if you were watching live, but their pressure was 203 for that quarter, and they kept it, barely dropped below 200 for the entire quarter. They were awesome in that quarter, and there was also some good coaching moves. Ford took Lever to task, kicked a couple of goals, and that was really clever. So for me, the real frustration, it wasn't just the first quarter, it was the first half of the second quarter as well, was we just weren't switched on, and we were butchering the ball. Steve May butchered it, Bowie butchered it, like Harms butchered it, and I'll talk about Nibbler later. He was the one player in the team, in my view, who was super switched on. And if it wasn't for him, we would have been in trouble in that. We got 31 points down. So that was a real worry. On the positive side of the ledger, though, that was a fantastic ability to switch back on and refocus, because not every team can do it. As I said, Lions failed to do it. Pies failed to do against the Hawks. Once you get behind, Lions almost failed again against Freo to do it. Once you're behind it, the 8 ball, it's hard to get going. So I was super, super impressed with our ability from halfway through that second quarter to get going and really, really put them to the sword. And by the end of the game, it looked like how it should have at the beginning, a top team playing a bottom team.
Well, David King was, and we've got a caller, Kieran, if you want to hold on for 1 sec. David King did mention a lot during the first quarter that the Melbourne numbers are he didn't really elaborate, but he kept saying that Melbourne's tracking, the numbers are tracking, but it was the poor execution, as you mentioned.
Yeah, we were at one point we were like 23% by foot halfway, a 20-odd minute mark of that first quarter. It was, and that's purely a mental thing. We're not a great kicking team at the best of times, and if you add not being mentally switched on, so track. I'm not going to argue with track, but I'll say, soft mentally, I would say, not soft physically, because as I said, our contested numbers were fine. Our inside 50s were fine. Our meters gained were fine.
Our pressure was down. It was in the poor.
Well, pressure was down. It was still 173. Like that's about what we came out in the first quarter against Richmond.
All right. Well, let's go to our caller, Kieran from Canberra. Kieran, how are you going, mate?
Good, mate. How are you going?
I'm fine, thank you.
Thanks for taking my call. Regarding the caricatures, I love them. I think they're brilliant. And as a fellow muso bin man, I love the hair, mate. I've never seen your face, but I love the hair in the caricature.
Bin man.
Yeah, indeed. That's my Gary Baker.
So just George and I.
No, Andy, don't give any mystery away, mate.
All right. Well, it does look like me and George. Bin man sort of looks like you.
I'm breaking the rules here. I shouldn't have said anything. Sorry, guys. Look, I know you'll be talking about in about 2 hours' time, but I'm wondering if I could have a small preview from the Doyens of the Demons regarding who it will be to take Harrison competitive spot. He's so important for crashing in and taking marks, and I'm just interested, and I know you guys will be talking about it in depth, but I'm really interested in your thoughts on who can be that competitive beast that we need there.
All right, well, maybe we will talk about it now. Let me just get to the page where I've got, because we do have a number of questions. I'd like to give the guys and girls that asked those questions their due. Let's, while we've got Kieran on the line, we do have a number of comments about Harrison Petty's unfortunate injury and some of the questions about who will replace him. So we're going to tackle that now, even not just with Kieran, we're going to do it now rather than do it in the changes section as well. So Smurf says, the Petty injury looked nasty. I imagine he'll be out for the rest of the season. Who will fill his spot? Lazy adds, with Petty likely out, the F word comes up again at selection this week, forward setup. The early consensus is that Grundy comes in. How much is this going to change the way our forward line looks? We had been getting the best results from having two key forwards who moved, made leads and kept the opponents guessing. I can't see Grundy offering the same kind of crafty forward movement. Brown simply doesn't look right at the moment, and who knows what T-Mac can offer. Selectors have their work cut out for them yet again. Travie14 chimes in with, If Petty is injured, is it worth giving Shaki a go? I think he could be an okay option, and I'd prefer him as a backup ruck than a 20-year-old JVR. El Diablo adds, could we play with only JVR as a true tall in finals? If Fritsch is back for finals, we could go with a forward line of JVR, Fritter, Track, A&B, Cozzy, Chandler. Would that be enough to win a premiership? Supreme Demon wants to know, with Harry Petty injured, do we bring back Brodie Grundy? Unless Josh Shaki, Ben Brown or Tom McDonald are better options in the forward line. So there's a lot to unpack here, and despite still being able to regularly kick scores above 90 points this season, we've done it on 11 out of 20 occasions. We've not been able, 21 occasions, we've not been able to settle on a forward line structure, be it as a result of form or injury. So George, followed by Big Man, who replaces Petty this week, and what could our forward line look like for the remainder of the year and into finals?
I've got no idea what it'll look like into the future.
But all right, next week.
Because players keep getting injured. We've got, Fritsch still to come back, hopefully. But to the question in itself, I think Grundy will come back in, but not because we need him as a forward line. I think he might pinch hit a little bit there. We'll need him in the ruck. And that's another thing that we'll talk about, because Carlton have got two rucks playing at the moment in Pitternet and De Koning. We can't expect Max to run against those all day. They're both specific rucks, so throwing JVR in there in a depleted forward line makes it difficult for us. So I think Grundy will come back in for sure. Shaki is a no. If Shaki was a possible, he would have been in weeks ago. We've encountered the same problem in the past with injuries and people not available. Smith is a maybe, but I don't know that Smith will hold his place in the side. He might be used as a sub. The one that I'm interested in as a possible fill-in is T-Mac. If he's available, he could fill the spot. I can't remember the injury report from last week. They said a week or two.
Still think he was 1 to 2 weeks, and you would think he'd need a run in the twos as well.
No, I don't believe in the run. No, not runs. They don't do runs in the twos anymore. They don't need to. He's been running for a number of weeks now, so I'd imagine he's got the sufficient loads up or very close to it. So it might be a case of break glass. Let's bring in T-Mac for a couple of weeks maybe. Ben Brown certainly not. He looked pretty awful in the Casey game, and they had a bye this week, so there was no reason to be able to judge his form. So I think Grundy will come back in, do a bit of pinch hitting. We don't know the situation with T-Mac. That's an internal matter for the club. But if he was available, I'd be bringing him back in just for this week, if nothing else.
Big Man, you go, and then we'll speak to Kieran and see what he thinks.
Yeah, it's a really curious one. I mean, in terms of Grundy, I'm less confident that he will come back in than I was a couple of weeks ago, only because trying to read the goody tea leaves in his presser, I mean, he doesn't give much away, and it's hard to work out from his tone, but he seems less effusive or less sort of confident about Grundy.
Can I interject? Based on his body language and the way he answered that question about Grundy, he's not convinced Grundy can make it as a forward, whether they use him as a ruck. But he, as the replay, I mean, he's obviously was upset about the whole Petty thing, and it was still very raw. But just reading his body language and the way he answered that question, he's not convinced Grundy's a forward, in my opinion.
No. But as George says, I totally agree with George. I don't think the idea was ever for him to go back and be a forward. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Like, it was, I know that's what they said.
Well, that's what the media is hounding them about, because that's what they said. Because that's what Melbourne said. Melbourne made that comment and was saying we're going to go work on his forward craft. So that's what the media have latched onto.
From him being the key forward, isn't it?
I understand.
Like, work on his forward craft.
Yeah.
It's a semantic thing. I think he will come back in. I reckon he'll come back in for finals, and I suspect, as I said a couple of weeks ago, that JVR might be the one who comes out. But who comes in this week, for instance, for Pets? Smith is more likely to go forward. I prefer Smith on the bench as a sub. I think that's his. I think it's just the perfect role for him. I don't like him. I thought he played all right. He did his job in the game, applied good pressure, kept his man well contained, which is the job of a defender after all. But I'm not, a huge fan of him playing as a permanent defender. more of a fan of him playing forward, but like he didn't take his chances really when he had that opportunity for a couple of games up forward. T-Mac, I think, is the wild card, but who knows, 1 to 2 weeks, that gives him a couple of games before finals potentially. That would be a big ask because he's a slow starter, isn't he, T-Mac? He seems to take a while to get going. I personally don't think it's anywhere near the bigger the deal it is that the media are making it out to be. And John Ralph, I saw a tweet that you've put on Demonland, Andy, that said, John Ralph said it's as bigger from a structural perspective as Dacos out for Collingwood. I mean, give me a spell. We've got Grundy for a start. We've got T-Mac. We've got Fritter coming back. It's just we've got Smith you can play forward as Goody said. They've got contingencies. They've got contingencies for the contingencies. So it's no way is it such a big deal. And hopefully there's conflicting reports on when he'll be back. Some 6 months, some 6 weeks. So let's hope that the finals aren't out of the equation. But who comes back this week will be really interesting to see. But my guess will be Smith will play forward.
Kieran, what do you think?
Yeah, great analysis as always. And I like to think, being an avid Demonland follower, we know that, and all of you do speak about this regularly, and that is that it's a rolling prospect. What it is this week may not be next week, and Goody has been doing that all year. Of course, you want to firm up close to the end of the season, but he doesn't mind testing it. I do know Binman as well, and George, and a few, Andy, you tend to think that two talls is our best makeup up forward, as well as 3 talls back. So that's the interesting part for me, because whilst Melksham and Fritter can be quasi-tall, they're not specifically a tall, are they, really? And that's the interesting part for me, is if they really do want that second tall, then I'm with you, George. Shackie's just not up to it, unfortunately, and Brown looks like he's past it. So it's an interesting problem in some respects, but I can't remember who said it, but someone said big men do well in finals. So Brody for me, I think, George, you're on the money, and I think he could come in and have a big part to play, but it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, I just hope they don't put too much emphasis on what happens this week. If Grundy, what the media want is a little sugar hit. So if Grundy doesn't get selected this week, they'll be talking about, well, what does that mean for Grundy and all of that stuff. Probably when JVR's going to stay, that's probably, now that we've lost Petty, we need a key forward. So JVR's unlikely to go out, I guess. But you're right, Shackie's not going to come in. Brown really, as you said, George, he's looking. He's really his mobility, but he's still not out of the picture. They would certainly hope that he's a opportunity. I just, Grundy's not going to be the pure lead up forward. It means Melk's probably going to stay in the side. You'd think there's probably no question about that. It'll be fascinating this week to see who they do go with. Maybe Tomlinson comes back in to go down back. George is shaking his head. So it really will be a fascinating selection this week. I just hope that if Grundy doesn't come in, that just doesn't become the big story and that fills up all the airtime.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Kieran. Anything else?
Andy, what's happened to that fantastic music you had at the start of the year, mate? One of your listeners? To the stings at the start, I loved it.
Yeah, I know we had sort of mixed reception to it. We'll just leave it at that.
No. Well, geez, I've had 2 negatives tonight. Sorry, mate. I better go before I had 3 strikes and I'm out.
Yeah, no problem, mate. We appreciate the calls as always.
Fantastic. Keep up the great work.
All right, mate. Appreciate it. Thank you.
See you, mate. Bye.
Cheers. That was Kieran from Canberra, our good mate. He's called in a number of times. Well, B-Man, let's get into your stats files. I know we sort of just skipped it to talk about Harrison Petty, but we'll get back on track. So you want to take away with your stats?
Yeah, a really interesting round again, or game again, from a stats perspective. And I find it really interesting. So shout out to Willow Ratings, who puts these up on Demonland in the stats file thread after each game. And for me, it's become absolutely compulsory thing. I really look forward to it. And it really helps me sort of get my head around the game. The key stats for us, the big one was plus 434 in metres gained, which is really, that's a huge stat for the Ds. And on that thread that I just talked about, stats file, there's a poster, Delightful D, a new poster who's been posting some terrific analysis and some really, really good quality data. And he was looking into some of the correlations between our scoring and between the relationship between the margins in our game and individual stats. On the back of a discussion in that thread about what Lions did to us in terms of being able to pick us apart with their short kicks and their marking. And number 2 for the margin in terms of correlation was metres gained. So, the thought was that, tracking metres gained is a very, very good way. It's number 2 on the list of about 20 of correlating stat. Number 1, of course, is the number 1 is goal difference. That obviously makes sense, is metres gained. And so when we got on top in metres gained, you could really see in this particular match that held very true. And once we got, that discussion we had back earlier in the year is maybe we need to stop being so forward half focused and time in forward half focused. It really probably shows why it's so important to the Melbourne way of playing, the Melbourne brand, if you like, metres gained. Inside 50s were level at quarter time, as I said, plus 24 at the end of the game. So after quarter time, we were plus 24 in inside 50s. Contested possessions, the big ones, plus 30 by the end of the game, roughly level at the end of the first quarter. It just shows, this is once we got the Melbourne game into gear. I really love this stat. This is a trending and a great, I've pointed this one out a few times this season, plus 20 for ground ball gets. And that's something that, we wasn't a strength of ours last year. We really struggled in that stat. It's a really critical stat in footy. And we'll talk a little bit later about our small forwards, and they did a terrific job winning the ground balls. We should be getting plus 20 against a young North Melbourne side in ground balls. The ground balls are the ones where 2 players or multiple players are competing for a ball that hits the deck. We should be winning them, and we should be plus 30 in contested possession. So centre clearances were only plus 3. Stoppage clearances, we were down 3, which was interesting. Goldstein and Gawn have had, as George has noted a few times over the last couple of years on the podcast, they've had some terrific battles over the years, and he's a class ruckman, Goldie. Stoppage clearances, we were plus 1 only for contested marks, which was really low. Marks inside 50 was a massive one, particularly given Petty. When did Petty go out of the game? What quarter was it?
Had to have been third quarter.
Third quarter, so
yeah, just early third. Yep.
Yeah, early third. So Petty wasn't on the ground for half of it. We were plus 12 for marks inside 50. Now that's not contested marks, obviously, so that's sort of creating space. And they started to, really look a bit gassed in the last quarter, which opened up a little bit. But still, 17 marks inside 50, given that was a thing that people were really red hot about criticising Melbourne for a few weeks back. That's a really good number against any side. Plus 2 for tackles inside 50, 12 to 10. So it was actually really impressive performance from the Roos, I thought. Their pressure inside 50, but pretty impressive from us as well. 12, I forget the game. It was maybe 5-6 weeks ago. We only had 2 tackles inside 50, I think, in one of the games at the G. Defensive 1-on-1 loss was we only lost 6.7% of our defensive one-on-ones. They lost 21%. So 1 in 5 for them, they got beaten one-on-one defensive situations, whereas we only lost 6.7, which is really impressive from our defensive unit, particularly given when you think Lever gave up 3 of them. Probably in the first 15 minutes, he gave up. It got outmarked by Ford. Was it Ford? Yeah, it was Ford. Yeah, 3 times. So the pressure was the really interesting one that I found really interesting. We were 174, 203, and that was about they were 203, which is elite. That's fantastic by them, and it showed. I personally think that was a factor in our poor disposal in the first, but I don't think it was the factor. I think it was just we weren't switched on the way we should have been coming into that game. 175 in the second quarter, and they dropped off to 163. And I don't know what the breakdown in that second quarter is, but my gut feeling is, I don't know, watching live, if you felt the same thing, it was the last 10 minutes. They ran out of gas completely, the Roos, and it was, we kicked those 3 late goals, and it was on the back of our increased pressure. So I would reckon it would have been 140, 150 for the first half of that second quarter. I was really frustrated, really annoyed with the way we came out in that second quarter, even more annoyed than I was in the first quarter. That was probably our lowest pressure rating for the game, but we really ramped it up by the end of that quarter. But weirdly, this is what really surprised me, because I thought we were okay after in the third quarter. Our pressure rating dropped to 160, and that's not far off a season low for that quarter. I think we had a quarter from memory where we were 158 or something, but that's a really low pressure coming out after half time when they would have got a rev up by Goody. They were 184 in that quarter, which is super impressive. Again, 189, we ramped it up in the last quarter, so we got going. But they kept their 182. So for the match, the average was 175. Remembering 180's AFL average and 182 is 200 delete, but it was 175 to 182, which was impressive by them. A young team playing for their coaches come back in. So good effort by the Roos there. The player, most pressure points for players was really, really fascinating, and it speaks to the way Goody used his bench that you mentioned, Andy. I thought that was super clever. It was so important to have a game like this, where even though we won by 5 goals, it would have great to have boosted our percentage. He could have chosen to do that in the last quarter if he'd kept his best players on the field for longer. He made a calculated decision, Goody, not to do that. Number one player with 29 pressure acts by, he 5 more than the second most player was Tom Sparrow. His season's average is 42. He applied 55 pressure points in this game, which is massive. That's huge by Tommy. James Harms, he a lot of people criticised his game, me included. Very frustrating. 7 clangers he had. Speak to that a bit later. But he did apply good pressure. His season average is 37.6, and he had 24 pressure acts for 50 points. Nibbler, who I'll speak to later, I thought he was awesome in that first quarter. He was switched on, and in that second quarter, he kept us in that game. That margin could have been worse if not for Nibbler. He had 20 pressure acts and 44 pressure points, just slightly below his season average, which is very impressive, 46. And no surprise, number 4 was Jack Viney with 38 pressure points. But the thing about Jack Viney with 38 pressure points, that's 15 points lower than his average. So he didn't have a huge game pressure-wise by his high standards. And the next one, the 5th, was Jake Bowie. So the one that I was really interested in watching, because my criticism over the last few weeks was JVR, to see where he was at with his pressure. It was okay. So it was better. His season average is a very low 22.6. He had 29 in this game. And 12 pressure acts. And I suspect, though, most of them would have been, or majority of them would have been when he was rucking, because he did quite a lot of rucking time. Time in forward half of the match was 63-37. So, but it really swung. It was 54-46 in the first quarter, 49-51 in the second. Third quarter, despite our low pressure rating in the third quarter, we had 77% of the time in our forward half in that third quarter, which is Melbourne gold. That's when we got on top and really crushed them, or really put that game away. Really, 67-33 for a 63-37 split for the game. So that was the big one that people are talking about is turnover. It was 48 points from turnover, which is, people have been saying, well, we need to be getting more from that. But our season average is 53, so not massively below it. The worry really was they got 54 points from turnover. Most of that, I think probably 30 of that or something, 25 in that first quarter and a half. And a big one for us was 34 points from stoppages to only 9 for them. So that's terrific going, particularly because really it's our B midfield in there most of the time, isn't it? So points from defensive halves becoming increasingly, I'm going to talk about this a bit later, increasingly important. 33 from the back half, season average 34. The interesting one, George, I thought for you was the centre bounce attendances. Max was 79%. His season average is 59. So he still rucked quite a lot, but that's because Grundy's not there, obviously. But really, JVR was impressive. He had 21% of the centre bounce attendance. He was there. And, without that effort by JVR, you can't rest Maxi, can you? And I don't know, George, what you think, but he's got quite good technique.
He's got very good technique. Yeah, it's almost like a basketballer technique. He gets a clean hand on the ball. He's got a good spring.
Yeah, well, and I reckon you're spot on. That's what I was going to say. It's not quite a tap work, but the way he directs it by hand, and that actually it's funny you should say that because I wondered whether he's got a basketball background. You know, if
No, I don't.
he's got time and space like the basketball.
Yeah, but he's certainly you haven't lost anything almost when JVR's in there. He struggled against Goldstein for a start because of Goldstein's just so big and strong, but certainly against Sherry he was holding more than his own.
And he worked hard, didn't he? He looked exhausted by the end of the match. You've got to remember with JVR, I'm not wanting to be hard on him, but he's a kid. He's only 19. So I don't know what people expect. 93.75 was the expected score, which I thought was a fascinating number. We took our chances again. We're kicking accurately again, and isn't Petty just a beautiful kick? It's obviously such a shame that he's not playing, but just both of them, JVR and Petty, have got such a similar kicking style. And as we'll talk a bit more in detail later, our small forwards went to work and Nibbler kicked a terrific goal. And geez, how exciting is it to have Cozzy? I mean, the setup that he did to Track's goal I thought was even better than the goal he kicked on the left foot in the first goal of the match. The way that he wrong-footed his opponent and centered the ball to Track, I thought his game was really terrific. That decision to centre it rather than go for goal really spoke to a player who's team first and his head right in the game. So, that statistically it wasn't as big a wipeout, particularly in that first quarter, as it might have felt like. So, I think the big stat for me is ultimately it was a 10-goal turnaround, wasn't it? We were at 31 points down.
Yep.
And had that. I always was confident that we would come back, but I was thinking, come on, we've got to start coming back. We don't want to lose this game.
All right, well, let's move on to our listener questions. Our first one is from Oh My D's, who says, the conditions of Blundstone Arena were absolutely deplorable, with so many players slipping and falling over during the match on a seemingly dry day. It's hard not to think the chopped-up surface also had a role to play in Petty's injury when his foot simply collapsed under itself. I'm sick and tired of the AFL always scheduling us to play in Tasmania against the Kangaroos. North have a contract to play 4 games a year in Hobart, but why can't they play interstate teams like Gold Coast Giants, Port Adelaide or West Coast ahead of us? And I've got to agree with this. The conditions of the ground weren't great. Max made mention of this in his post-game interview, and I'm sick of us being the AFL's minnow that always seems to get shunted to these backwater venues, and apologies to any listeners in Hobart and Geelong. This season, the Kangaroos also played Port, GWS, and later in the year they play the Suns in Hobart. They have not played any other Victorian teams in Tasmania this season. They played home games at Marvel against the Swans and West Coast. Surely one of those teams could have gone down there. Why are we always the Victorian team that happens to draw the short straw, particularly because we always draw the short straw annually to make the trip to Cardinia Park? Again, apologies to any Tassie Demons who benefit from this game, including Demonland's own Nasher, who and they get the opportunity to see the Demons play live as a result of this fixturing. So I don't want to take that away from them, but we seem to always be the team that goes down there, George.
Can't say much more than that. I will make the point that of the 4 games that North had this season at Blundstone Arena, 3 of them were against Port, GWS and Gold Coast. So they do play the interstate teams down there. Unfortunately, we're the only one that's the odd man out, so to speak. Why is that the case? I don't know.
Why can't they play the game? They play the Saints, their away game, Saints home game at Marvel. So why should they give St Kilda an advantage by playing, at Marvel? Send them off to Tasmania.
Yeah, look, I don't know. It's the AFL fixturing, and fixturing is the right word for this. If I was North Melbourne, I'd be pretty ropeable. I mean, they've got these 4 games down there that they hope to make money out of. There was a grand total of 8,000 people at this game, and that was because it was Melbourne. I seem to recall the earlier game against GWS, they claimed there was 5,000. If there was 1,000 there, I would have, learned how to count again. That they get 4 home games down there, and they get even 3 out of those games get almost a guaranteed a 0 crowd. So playing Melbourne was fortunate for it, but why do we get it? I've got no idea. The ground was horrible, absolutely horrible. In the first quarter in particular, I was saying, why haven't the players got long stops on or whatever they use these days for that sort of thing? The number of players who were slipping, and it was from both sides as well. Even the commentators noted that we scored a number of goals simply because the North players fell over, but it was the same for both sides. I don't know what the future of North playing down there is. I don't think it's very promising for their long-term prospects. But in the meantime, we've won the game. It was good to win down there because normally it's blowing a gale and you get all sorts of ridiculous results as a result of that. But they're certainly not building an AFL market down there by any stretch. And if you're a Tasmanian, why would you go and see a game like this unless you're a Melbourne supporter, knowing now that Tasmania is going to get a side?
I'm not. I personally, I don't mind that we have to play there. Someone's got to play there, and I don't mind that at all. I don't think. I want the Suns to work. I want GWS to work, and so I don't think it's fair for them to be shunted down there either. They should share it around, obviously, with the Victorian clubs. Same. I'm more frustrated and much more frustrated that we have to play at Cardinia Park. But what I do find really frustrating is that ground did not look AFL ready, or AFL standard. I mean, it's the elite competition, was Petty's injury have anything to do with that? Probably not. I don't know. I mean, although he sort of slipped, but they're exactly the sort of conditions. I think it was Zeeble when he got wrong-footed by Cos. He sort of slid. That's exactly the way they, constantly see ACLs get done, where they say, "Oh, it looks so innocuous," where they, they just slightly slip on the turf. There were 12 examples where players slipped on the turf. I just don't think, if they can't guarantee an AFL standard ground, they shouldn't be playing games there. That would be my view. I mean, we were a bit unlucky because it was an even worse condition ground at Alice Springs. That was our choice, so we can't blame that. It was a really rare occurrence. Normally that's like a bowling green. They had, historical levels of rain in the lead up to it, so it was unfortunate. But I would be of the view that if it's a bit like a cricket match, exactly like a a test level cricket match, is that if it's not produced in at a standard which is AFL ready, a game shouldn't be played on it because there's too much at stake. I mean, with 4 games out from the finals, you lose a couple of players because they slip on sodden turf, or it really. I just don't think it speaks to a particularly, professional competition where you're not playing on quality grounds.
You've talked about the next topic. You've talked a little bit about it, the slow start, the lack of pressure. Red Jacket says, I was bitterly disappointed with our slow start today. No doubt the Kangaroos came out fired up and then faded as the game went on. However, our pressure in the first quarter from us was non-existent, and with second place and the home final up for grabs, we had everything to play for. Would love to get the panel's thoughts on what happened in the first quarter. Delightful play adds, having been at the game but not looked at any stats, it seemed that we had a low-pressure first quarter with minimal efforts to corral, shepherd or tackle in our forward half. Who and what led to the change in the second? That being said, it felt like a low-pressure game generally throughout the match. Then she's edited to say maybe it was that when we then matched the pressure through the rest of the match after the first. Was pretty happy with Cozzie's pressure game all throughout and Hunter's corralling. Go Lordy asks, we committed some horrendous foot passing errors in the first quarter. I haven't looked at the replay yet, but does the panel think this was just sloppy work by the D's or the result of North's first quarter pressure? Now, B-Man, you've talked about the pressure already in the stats files. Was sort of down on, but what are your thoughts on why that was, and you being on the more positive scale on the Demons spectrum, was the lack of pressure a concern for you? I don't think it was, but if there's anything else you want to add.
Well, the lack of pressure wasn't. I mean, in the sense that I think it looked worse than it did because of the relative gap. Normally, if we're 170, and I mentioned in that Tigers game, it was 175 or something from memory in the first quarter. They were only 181. So it didn't feel like the Tigers were applying that much more pressure than us because they weren't. In this game, it was 174 to 203. That is, I heard the SBN podcast, and they said when you get a gap of 15 pressure points, it's almost unheard of. And they made the point that they're normally correlated between each other because, the more intense the game is, both teams are applying pressure, I should say. It's just the nature of how a game looks. So I think what was striking was how much more pressure they applied. Our pressure was actually relatively okay. They were unbelievable, and we didn't match them. That was more the point, I think. And so for me, the worry was not so much the pressure we applied. The worry was that our disposal. I mean, of course, some of it was related to the pressure they applied, but in finals, you've got to be able to in high pressure games, you need to execute your skills under pressure. That's the thing good sides do. So it speaks to me we didn't arrive mentally switched on for the start of the game. And so, as I said before, what track was probably meaning was we were mentally soft. We weren't in the zone we needed to be. And they will review it. They'll look at it. They brought the whole team down there. Who knows? Maybe, that's really unusual. Maybe that threw them out because Casey bloody had a bye again, which is just another infuriating thing at this time of year. It's amateurs feel for us with 3 games out to have a bye. So they'll look at a lot of things, but, it didn't help. The ground conditions don't help. It feels like an amateur ground. You're playing 16th. It's hard not for these players to maybe start thinking 1-2 weeks ahead and big game next week at the G. I just think that, for me, the most frustrating thing was the foot skills, and that's a mental thing, not a sort of a physical thing. They would have felt like we're applying the right pressure. We're contesting for the footy, we're getting it in our forward half. All of those things look fine, but they just weren't switched on.
I'm pretty sure you mentioned the pressure rating in the first quarter was 170, whatever. I don't know, have you watched the replay from Fox?
No, it's funny because I haven't had a chance. So that's one of the things that this is the first time I haven't watched a replay almost this whole season, I think.
So have a look in that first quarter if you dare to watch it, because I think early on in that quarter or midway through, we were a lot lower than that. We were well in the
right.
poor, when they do that little graphic, they were up in the 200s. We were like 160. I'd be guessing.
I seem to recall 103.
Oh yeah, it was really, really low. It was in the really poor. So that's where a lot of these people who were talking about how low our pressure was and saying we didn't come out switched on, they're talking about that pressure.
And maybe, I don't know whether you felt it, but when Cozzy kicked that goal, even I, as a fan, I'm not playing, obviously, think, oh, cool, here we go. This is
we just think it's just going to happen.
And they got a goal, the next goal, and there were some horrible turnovers, though. Let's face it. There was some horrible. We made, I think, there was 57, I think, clangers in the match, and I reckon it felt like all of them were in that first 20 minutes.
Yeah, I recall our first 4 inside 50s were kicks that went directly down to Jack Siebel's throat.
Absolutely. We have a habit of being able to find oppositions when we're kicking in.
And that should have been onto somebody else's chest, and it would have been an easy kick in each case for goal, and we got absolutely nothing out of it.
And that's where they actually were quite efficient from that point, and we'll talk about this a bit later about transition in footy's becoming so critical. They actually transitioned the ball super well in that first 20 minutes and really opened us up. That speaks slightly to work rate as well, because that's the role of players to get back and block up the holes so, that they can't transition the ball so easily. And we got exposed. Our one-on-one work up forward is a bit of a worry, and Lever isn't a great one-on-one player,
No, so we'll talk more about that a bit later on. Adapting in the game. So we've got a voicemail from Dan who wants to praise the D's for their ability to adapt in game. So here we go.
Hey guys, this is Dan, long time listener, first time caller, long time lurker, I should say too. I don't often contribute to Demon Land, but do enjoy the content and really enjoy this podcast and the analysis, like everyone seems to say each week, so thank you for that. Have to become a regular fixture in the week, so thanks for becoming part of my routine and adding to it. So I just wanted to make a quick comment and invite a discussion on this. Like, I think one of the underrated strengths of Melbourne is our ability to adapt in game, and no matter what the circumstances are. So yesterday we were frankly pretty crap early. I think we just might have had a weird preparation, weird flight, who knows? But I think what really shone through in the end was our ability to not get too overwhelmed by the fact that we were losing and not playing well, but we were able to adapt in game and ultimately prevail over a team which we obviously were better than, but we still had to switch on and prove that fact. But I think it's a strength, and it's something that really shone through in 2021, especially during the season when we were able to find a way to win in a lot of games where it felt like we were not doing too well early on. So our on-field leadership is really strong, but also our ability to adapt tactically, I think, is a really big strength of ours. And I think it's something we didn't have so much last year, whether it was fitness or injuries, or maybe our mentality wasn't quite as strong. I'm not sure, but yeah, I just feel this year, the last 3-4 weeks have really shown that we've got that grit and determination, but also some tactical nous. Yeah, I'm just interested in your thoughts on that. Go D's, have a good one.
And then Buck Neckett has added 62-point turnaround was good, but we were shown up badly in the first quarter. I like that we can rest momentum and control games. I see this as being a significant part of our skill set for 2023's premiership run. Do you trust us to do this in big games now? Can we win from behind in the finals? Will we ever flip the switch and dominate 4 quarters? We don't seem to at the moment. So, George, what do you think about us adapting in-game to what is being thrown at us and our ability to come back from being behind?
I'm sure you, Andy, would prefer us not to worry about coming from behind, to stay in front the whole game.
I just want a good, nice cruisy win, please.
That's exactly, yeah. It was interesting on this very point. Watched the Hawthorn-Collingwood game, and I can't remember who was doing the commentary on it, but there was one particular point where they, because Hawthorn came out and did exactly what North Melbourne did to us in this game. They absolutely poleaxed the Pies all around the ground, and it almost looked like everybody was waiting for Hawthorn to fall over and Collingwood to come back. Well, it didn't happen in this game, but the commentary sort of at the quarter time break was something along the lines of, they asked, I can't remember who it was, must have been an ex-coach or someone, how do you change things when you're in this particular situation? And they made the point that it was very, very difficult to do it in game. You can get a runner out there to change an individual sort of individual's action or roles. You can get some interaction on the bench where you've got 4 people coming on and off, and I suspect that's why the majority of coaches these days actually coach from the bench. They're giving not just the message to one person, they're giving it to a group of people, or certainly to an individual who's going back to the forward line or the back line or wherever they need to go. But they said that the only time you actually get to structurally change things, to fix things up, is at the breaks. So you see the turnarounds after the quarter time in our particular game. Goody mentioned it in his post-match interview, where he says things like, we changed a few things up. Well, unfortunately, I was watching the game on television. You can't see what he actually changed up, but that's the opportunity for the coaches. It's really difficult in the game. You depend on your leaders on the ground. You depend on getting the message out there, but it's really hard structurally to get things differently changed up until the breaks. So, but I do have a lot of confidence in the current team and the current coaching group to be able to institute those changes. I think we've all been around long enough to see where things didn't change, or we didn't have the players to be able to change or alter things, because each game's different, and depending on what the opposition throw at you, you've got to be able to adapt all the time. So, I think we've got a great group of players and coaches at the moment.
I think you hit the nail on the head, George, in terms of when you mentioned the player leadership, because there's been a couple of changes there's a lot of changes in footy, but one of them has been how much momentum has become part of the game. I mean, think about how often coaches talk about the idea that, there's 3 or 4 momentum swings in the game. Goody's been talking about this for 2 or 3 seasons, about the critical importance of taking advantage of it when you've got momentum as a team in terms of putting scoreboard pressure on and preventing the opposition doing exactly the same when they have momentum. And the other big change that I think it's easy to forget is the reduction in the amount of times the runner can come out onto the field. So the runner can't come out anymore and move a player in the way that when it was unlimited. It used to be unlimited, didn't it? And then now I think it's 2 or 3 times a quarter it's limited to for the times the runner. So exactly as it suggests, it really is on the players. And if one of the things I really like about Goody is that he talks. It feels like he talks often in the same themes that he tells the players. So after the Richmond game in the presser, he mentioned 3 times in that presser, a couple of times in the presser, that we came back from 21 points down 3 times. He mentioned that. And the reason I noted is because in the midweek presser ahead of this game, he mentioned the same thing again, that, what he was really proud of was that the players didn't just come back once, they came back 3 times. And I think that goes to your point, George, about the players showing leadership and, obviously the way they train and their systems and all of those things. But I felt like what Goody was trying to emphasise was the players' resilience to do exactly what Dan's saying, is adapt in game and, take leadership. And I think really what we've seen in the last few weeks is how powerful and what a great leader Viney is. A few times in this match, just through his role in the Roos match, just through his role modelling and tack on the ball, it was just like we were talking about last week about his performance in the Richmond game. He just goes and turns a match, and you could feel at one point that the whole team lifted. Like it was almost, you could see, with about 8 minutes to go in the second quarter, that we took it up a notch. We lifted our rating collectively, and that's adapting, on the fly, isn't it? Is somehow as a collective they suddenly realise, right, we've got to take advantage. And then the leaders stood up. JVR kicked a goal. I think one of Chandler's goal was in that period as well. I think it's a really good point, and Goody has been emphasising how well the players have been doing that all season. And obviously it's critical coming into finals when you're playing better teams who will get their momentum at some point.
Gaundy the Great asks, given we have a KPI around forward half time, is it concerning our forward turnovers and overall game pressures are not where they need to be in order to achieve that KPI? More than half our score came from stoppages, which is hard to sustain during finals. Is our average AFL pressure rating, sometimes less by design, in order to stay fresh, or a sign of fatigue/complacency? Now, B-Man, it's another one of your fortes, and I wouldn't even know where to begin answering this one. So over to you.
Yeah, I saw the question. I saw it on the thread on Demonland as well. And I'm not quite sure whether our rating has been average, but I think it's because we don't often play matches where we're 200. So my sense is. My point before that the champion data guys were saying that it's often correlated. So the higher pressure match, both teams are higher pressure. So it's really unusual to have a 30% gap. So I think our pressure has been relatively good, actually, compared to the team we're playing in the last 6 or 7 weeks. I think fatigue is definitely a factor. But if we go back to I've said this a number of times, go back to the first 6 games of the season and look at what our pressure rating was in those games in the first quarter. We were blitzing teams, and that's what we will ramp up again. The pressure is, a very good correlation with fitness, in my view, and with energy as we're coming out of our, we're starting to perform. You only need to see Collingwood's performance against the Hawks that George was referencing. They looked fatigued and could not simply apply the pressure that the Hawks could. The Hawks just smashed them off the park, and they could never they did get going a bit, the Pies, but so I don't know that I'd agree that it's a real worry, our pressure. And I'm not quite sure about our inside forward pressure, but our tackle numbers have been good. As I said, in this game, I think it was 12 tackles inside 50, which is impressive. It dropped off in that middle part of the season. So it's that block of time, between rounds 11 and 15, 16. I think the key is not to allow those games not to fall into the trap the media does and assume that those games are actually, they are a good picture of what our game looks like. Go back to the first 6 games of the season and work back from there. So for me, it's not a major concern. And it wasn't in this game. We got going when we needed to. Although, funnily enough, as I said, it was only 160 in the third quarter. So that was kind of curious.
Pew 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 says, with Clary on the brink of his long-awaited return, I honestly think that James Harmes has played his last game of footy for the Demons. Is there a role for Harmesy going forward? Supreme Demon is scathing as he asks, what has happened to James Harmes? He seems to be playing dumb, putrid football. I have been quite frustrated with his performances recently. And Go Lordy responds to that, saying, look at the stats. Harmesy was in the D's top 10. Now, I too was a little bit frustrated with Harmesy on the weekend. He had 20 possessions, 5 inside 50s, 3 clearances, 3 score involvements, and was the second highest in the team for pressure acts. However, he also had a team high of 7 clangers and was third worst for disposal efficiency at 60%. And he was the one that was playing on Zeeble early in the game, and Zeeble had those 3 or 4 possessions in the first few minutes. But then again, we did kick it straight down his throat. Bin Man, with Clary on the brink of a return, is there a role for Harmes either this week or in finals and beyond?
Yeah, I'm not generally down on players, and so I always think there's a worry when you've got a particular set against a player, like perhaps I did with Melksham, certainly with Weed, or I feel like I've got a bit with Harmes because in the match, watching it I found myself, a few times going, "Come on, Harmesy, what are you doing?" So, without seeing those numbers, I thought his numbers were a lot better. But watching live, and as I said, I haven't had I will watch the replay. I haven't yet. Watching live, I was not impressed with his game at all. I'll talk to this about later, but a clanger, the definition of a clanger, it's a really good stat, actually. The definition is an error made by a player. This is the Champion Data definition of how they define clanger. An error made by a player resulting in a negative result for his side. Disposal clangers are any kick or handball that directly turns the ball over to the opposition. Freeze and 50-metre penalties against. No pressure errors, which I found really interesting. I didn't realise that. Drop marks and debits are all included in clangers. So it's not just, what you'd think of a clanger like a turnover. So turnovers and clangers are different. A turnover is a type of clangers. But 7 clangers is a lot. And they felt like, to me, a lot of them were in that first quarter when we just weren't switched on, when they got the jump on us. We allowed a team that isn't anywhere near as good as us to get a jump on us. I said a few weeks ago, statistically, very few teams, it's very infrequent you come back from a 30-point margin. And I thought about that when they got to 31 points. That it is statistically very difficult to come back from. They got out to that margin because of our clangers, not just Harmesy. So the short answer is it felt like live he played terrible. There's sort of some counter. His pressure was good. That was terrific. So I think he will go out. I think, it's too black and white to say he's played his last game for Melbourne. But, he's the obvious out for, that's a fairly good in, like no disrespect to Harmesy, but you're going to take Clary every day of the week, aren't you? So, he's the logical one to come out for Clary next week for sure. But I did find Harmesy's game particularly frustrating, but it might be I was particularly frustrating watching, and he was my whipping boy for the match. But to be honest, that's on the back of I thought he was lucky to keep his spot after the Richmond game, and in fact, we talked about it. I thought he'd come out after the Richmond game. So, I wasn't super impressed. I don't know about you, George.
I wasn't impressed at all. I'm not worried so much about the poor disposals components. He just keeps losing his man is what really concerns me. When he becomes particularly damaging when he's in the middle. We talked about those first, certainly 3 out of the 4 that Zeeble got for a start were because Harmes wasn't on his man. It was as simple as that. And you go,
who were you playing on in that?
Zeeble.
He was.
Harmes was on Zeeble, yeah.
He was half forward
Harmes was obviously the first rotation and the half forward line.
With a run with roll? Or
well, he was standing alongside him at the bounce. Right. But yeah, he's at the moment all he can offer is if there's a ball on the ground, you can tell him go and get the ball. But when he's got to start thinking about who he's playing on or where he's got to go, he's completely at sea. He hasn't played a decent tagging role, I'm afraid to tell people, since 2018. But people still think he's a tagger. When Clary's coming back in, Harmesy will be the easy out. And honestly, I don't know why he was in there in the first place, because he didn't show very much at Casey either. Got lots of possessions, but had lots and lots of clangers as well in those same games. But yeah.
All right, Scroll says, kudos to our small forwards this week. They really lifted this week and got us back into the match when needed. 3 goals apiece to Cozzy, Chin and Nibbler was just what the Hobart doctor ordered. Supreme Demon adds, praise has to go to our small forwards this week with Kay Chandler, Alex Neil-Bullen and Cozzy Pickett against North Melbourne. They all played very well. Was this one of Alex Neil-Bullen's best ever games for the Demons? Sam6172 adds, not a question, but could we get some love for Nibbler? So often everyone's punching bag for whatever reason, but he was excellent and has been for the last few games. Also, so good to see Cozzy nail some of those trick shots. My kids absolutely love him because of these sort of things. Our house erupts with a giant yell of Cozzy every time he looks like he's about to go for goal. And we really did get bang for our buck from our small forwards this week. Along with their 3 goals apiece, Nibbler, Cozzy and Chandler had 9, 8 and 4 score involvements. Cozzy was just electric. He's really stepped up his game in the past few weeks. 10 goals, 4 in the past 4 weeks. Chandler kicked some very timely goals too and notched up his 5th bag of 3 goals for the season. That's just incredible from him. He was deadly accurate as well. B-Man, your mate Nibbler, had one of his best forward half games for a long time, as well as his usual high-pressure game. He kicked his first bag since rounds 9 and 10 in 2018, when he kicked 4 and 3 goals respectively. So what do you have to say for that, B-Man?
Well, Sam6172, you have come to the right person for some Nibbler love. So, George, Andy, you're going to have to bear with me, but because, I've done a bit of drilling down on Nibbler's game. But just before, as you mentioned, those small forwards all had fantastic games. So all had up around the 10 kicks. Cozzy had 10 kicks, 14 disposals, so 14, 16, 17, as you said. Each of them kicked 3 goals. They all contributed, I thought. I really thought Cade's 2 goals were really important in terms of taking advantage of exactly what we were talking about before, is pushing back against the team who had the momentum. Both of them were, like, his first 2 shots at goal were pure hits, and
he's got a good
really needed them.
Set shot for goal.
And I don't know about how you guys felt when he drilled it. It's like those kicks where you hope that they get them 60% of the time, and you're just willing them to kick it. JVR kicked one as well. And I thought David King had a good calling game, and he mentioned, I thought, a really interesting thing about the leadership of Cade Chandler showing, and I hadn't really sort of thought about that. That was a great example. He stood up when needed. Cozzy, I mean, we've got just something unbelievable there. That goal he kicked, left forward pocket, left on his left foot. I mean, how do you stop that? And it went straight through. Like, if they showed the replay, and that was the Demon Army in front of them. So shout out to the Demon Army, because they were talking about, the D's fans having the best seats in the house. I'm pretty sure that was where the Demon Army was sitting. So they had a view of that kick, and they also had a view of the beautiful cross that he centered to track, which was just magnificent. They all had great games. On Nibbler, just, I'm a huge Nibbler fan. There's a big, strong confirmation bias in a positive way there. Ironically, the reason why it was coincidental that was posted as a question this week, because I wanted to talk about Nibbler because he plays his 150th game against the Hawks, and in classic Nibbler ways, Max plays his 200th that week. So, it's all going to be about Nibbler. And so I was anxious that Nibbler didn't get sort of lost in the love for Max. So I wanted to give Nibbler some love as well. So thanks very much for that question. So 148 games. He was drafted number 40 in the 2014 national draft. He debuted in 2015. He was recruited from Plimpton. He was recruited as a midfielder initially. That's what he played his junior football. He's had elite endurance ever since he's been in footy. He's, I think, a much maligned player. People have got a set against him, and they just see his mistakes and as if he is the only one who makes them. And this game, I found I was really, really supporting him in this game, because he was the only player I felt like who was totally switched on and ready for this game of footy. So I thought he had a huge game. I don't know if it was his best game for the club because it was best game statistically in some respects, but he's had other better games statistically, actually. Everyone loves the goals. That's the thing, but that's not his KPIs. I've said this so many times. It's better to think of him as a winger. His role as a high half forward. There's a clip I want to play later that will go into detail from Daniel Hoyne from Champion Data explaining that role, so I won't do it now. But I think he's often, that notion of him being a role player is used as a pejorative, he's just a role player. As I say, I acknowledge my confirmation bias, so my view of him, but is maybe a bit coloured in a positive way. But I think he's a brilliant footballer with far better, or an excellent footballer with far better skills than what he's given credit for. For me, he's so much more than a role player. He's played every game bar 2 in the last 3 seasons of football. 5 finals and a premiership medal. So in 3 full seasons of footy, he's played every single game bar 2. Of course, the 5 finals and the premiership medals, with more finals to come. That is some record, and I challenge anyone. Is there another Melbourne player who could match that in the last 60 years? And I don't mean that, and I'm not joking. That's a serious question. There's no one in this team. There's not a single player in this team who's played more games than Nibbler since the start of the 21 season. So that is a super impressive performance. As I said, he plays his 150 against the Hawks. His foot skills are simply not as bad as what many people think they are. The evidence suggests they're actually comparatively quite good. A lot of people don't put much store in disposal efficiency, and it can be a little bit misleading, I'll grant you that. But over the course of season, it's still a reasonable measure of skill. And that's evidenced by the fact the best players in our team, the ones we think are the best kicks, have all got good disposal efficiency by foot. For instance, Bowie goes at 73.7 and Salo at 66. Nibbler goes at 53.8, which is relatively average. But by way of comparison, Harmsy goes at 51.2, Track goes at 56, so only a touch better than Nibbler, and Hunter only goes a touch better than Nibbler at 57. If you don't rate disposal efficiency as a guide, it's hard to argue accuracy for goals isn't a good measure of kicking skill. He's kicked 17-4 this season. So it's not like he's not kicking goals. 17-4 at 58% for accuracy. Brownie's considered an excellent shot for goal. He's kicked 11 at 61. Fritter's kicked 29 at 51.8. So he's more accurate kicking for goals than Fritter. Track, who credit to him, has improved his kicking. He's kicked 23 goals, but he only goes at 33% compared to Nibbler's 58%. Harmsy he hasn't got a percentage for accuracy because he hasn't got 10 shots yet, but he's 1-6 from his shots a goal, including those 2 set shot howlers against the Tigers. So he's a much better kick. I mentioned clangers, and what they are, that they're an error made by a player resulting in a negative outcome for the side, and that's the thing that people most nail Nibbler on. He makes too many decision-making errors. He turns the ball over. He gives it back to the opposition. He drops marks. But the facts again, they do not support it. They on the weekend we had 55 clangers in total. Nibbler only had 3. 5 other players had 3, including Cos, Salo, and JJ. 4 players had more clangers, including Harmsy with 7 and Viney with 5. And keep in mind, only 2 players come close to running the same amount of kilometres in a game as Nibbler does in a game, which is Langers and Hunter, which means, like those 2 players, he's often super, super fatigued when kicking. So clangers are inevitable for those sorts of players who run those sorts of distances. Again, if you think he was kicking, he's only averaging 2.84 clangers a game, so people would expect that that's pretty poor compared to others in the AFL. But on the league-wide table, that puts him 181st. He's 181 in the AFL for average per clangers per game. So, that's actually really good. I recognise mids will skew high for clangers because they're almost always under pressure when they're kicking, but it's not as if Nibbler isn't also under pressure when he's kicking. But by way of, remembering 181, he's in the league, Nibbler. Way of comparison, Clary is number 4 in the AFL for clangers, 5.2 per game. Track is 12th at 4.5 a game. As I said, I understand that mids skew higher, particularly these sort of players. Viney's 16th on that list at 4.4 games. There's 8 D's players who have more clangers on average per game than Nibbler, including Melksham and Cos, who are considered by most to be excellent kicks. Nick Dacos has more clangers per game. Pendlebury, Rankin, Goulden, Rosie, Josh Kelly, all brilliant kicks, all have more clangers per game than, and some of them aren't mids like Josh Kelly than Nibbler. So champion data ratings is considered a pretty good rating in the industry. He's, many people would think, where would you guess Nibbler is in Melbourne? Most people would guess, 20 to 25. He's 13th. Nibbler's the 13th highest rated player at Melbourne. So a lot of love for Nibbler. 150th game in 2 weeks. He's one of my all-time favourite players. I'll be there with bells on. He's a heart and soul player and a leader, both from a cultural sense, but also just, the effort he puts in, week out. And no better example of that was in the game that we just saw on the weekend.
That was the president of the Neil Bullen fan club. Memberships can be DM'd to PM'd to B-Man on Demonland. George?
Yeah, I'd just like to add a little bit more to recognise Chandler's efforts. This was a guy who last year was seriously looking at being delisted or moving elsewhere with the club, and like you said, he's had 5 games with 3 goals in each game. He's locked his position into the side pretty solidly by that. And just to confirm what we've already said, those couple of goals that he got before the halftime break were absolutely critical, alongside JVR's one after the bell. Those are the goals that you're going, we need to kick this one, and the kicks were absolutely, utterly straight, which was fantastic to see.
Kicking action, hasn't he?
Yeah. It's those are the sort of outcomes that you love to see. And like I said, for a kid who is almost on the verge of leaving the club or being forced out the door, whatever you might like to call it, he's done exactly what the coaches wanted him to do. He's a natural footballer and he's a great addition to our side. So yeah, he got the result certainly in this game.
And I was surprised. I shouldn't have been, but he's 23. They said on the call he's 23. And so he's coming into really his peak period, 23 to 24, 25. I totally agree, George. I thought he was terrific. And he brings a real positive energy, doesn't he? Like when we needed it, he really injected energy into that game, I thought, Archie. And so, we talked about Cozzy. We can talk about him all day.
All right, let's move on. Bigfoot says, I thought Gus was excellent yesterday. Viney has rightly been praised for stepping up whilst Clary has been out, but Gus too has been huge in filling the void in the midfield. Will Gus remain in the midfield when Oliver returns? Love the podcast. Keep up the great work. Gus had a great game, 37 touches, 13 contested, 19 pressure acts and 8 score involvements, 6 clearances, 5 inside 50s. The last 10 games in the midfield, Gus has amassed 27, 24, 24, 25, 24, 25, 29, 26, 22 and 37 possessions. Job well done in Clary's absence. He's given us an extra string in our midfield bow. George, what do you imagine his role will be once Clary slots back in the side?
I think this is the 3rd week in a row that I've had to talk about how good Gus is.
Would you prefer to be talking about how bad he is and who's going to replace him?
No. This is a joyous job that you've given me. Wasn't that a fantastic game? Absolutely fantastic. And he just keeps getting better and better. And like I've said the last couple of weeks, a coach would absolutely be delighted to have a player like that who is so versatile, and then to have so much effect in the game was just extraordinary. I think it's easy. People might look at numbers and go, 37 disposals, but he's been playing in the midfield in the absence of Clayton Oliver, for crying out loud. If people like Gus and Viney hadn't stood up, I don't think we'd be where we are at the moment. And more importantly, he's been able to release Petrarca to go forward, more so than what we would ever have expected, which has helped to cover up our forward line problems in injuries and who do we put up there and who's going to be a marking target. So it's not just Guts getting 37 disposals, it's enabling the benefits to be felt upfield as well. But he's been fantastic. I don't think we're going to change why would you change at the moment? Why would you put him anywhere else, even when Clary does come back? Because it releases the Petrarca devil up forward again. So it just creates so much more options, and it's really threatening. For going into finals when you've got a player like Gus who can get 37 touches in a game, admittedly against North Melbourne, but then you're going to bring in a Clary alongside him, and you still haven't got Petrarca in there, and you've still got a Viney alongside. It's a fantastic.
Yeah, I was of the view that, I like him better back at halfback, pushing back, but he's been, like you said, George, he's been so impressive in the last 3 weeks. And now I think with Petty's injury, it perhaps puts even more importance on keeping track, being able to play a sort of 60-40, 40-60 split up forward. And if he does, then we need Gus in the middle. So he was amazing in this match. He can't have had 37 more than 35 possessions very often in his career, I wouldn't have thought.
I had a look. There's only a smattering of those high 30s for him. Royal Demon says, thanks to this podcast, I've been able to observe games and players through a different lens, and I usually would have watched Melksham's game this week and just dismissed it as being a standard Melksham low possession, no goal game, and would probably be screaming for his head. You guys have helped me understand specific roles that certain players, let's call them role players, have in the side. Case in point, the incredible Melk. You've opened my eyes to seeing that Jake is the perfect player to play a defensive forward role on key defensive players like he did with Andrews a few weeks back. This week he was playing on Aiden Core, who plays a very similar role to Andrews. In the past 5 weeks, Core has racked up 15, 12, 27, 21 and 18 disposals and had 5, 4, 9, 4 and 8 intercept possessions and racked up 344, 373, 369, 446 and 535 metres gained. Melky has held Core accountable this week, keeping him to a 6-week low of 10 possessions, 3 intercepts and 239 metres gained. On top of that, he had a season-high 5 tackles, all whilst being mauled at every contest without receiving a free kick and, most importantly, without getting frustrated about it and having it affect his game. Well, that's very observant of you, Royal Demon. Perhaps I should listen to my own podcast. I can't take any credit for educating our listeners in this case, with defining the role that Jake plays in the forward line. The credit goes to my incredible analytical co-host, George and B-Man. B-Man, does what Royal Demon brings up and the stats that he provided, does that track with you?
Oh, totally. I hadn't realised how important Core was. That was a terrific question, and I didn't realise how important Core has been for the Roos, actually, in a team that's in struggle town all season. I haven't watched many of the Roos games, to be honest. So I didn't realise that he'd played such an important intercepting role. Spot on. And I actually read that question and thought of you, George, that, like you'd be thrilled. 5 tackles inside 50, that's been the knock on his game, in previous season, hasn't it? His tackles inside 50. And it sort of goes to that question about our forward half pressure. It's been really, that question before about it. It's been actually pretty good in the last few weeks. The thing that I was really most impressed about actually in this game was he should have got 4 or 5 free kicks. It was ridiculous. It was flat out ridiculous. Even that, in fact, I don't know whether the commentators, I know that they've got an AFL directive not to criticise the umpires, but even they were pointing out, hold on, he's getting grappled. And I had to laugh at one point because JVR got a free kick for grappling and Melk would have been thinking, what do I have to do to get a free kick? But what I was super, super impressed about, my big knock in previous years for Melk was his sort of body language and, particularly in 21 when, we've talked about it a number of times, but when he infamously kicked the ball out to an empty stand in that game at the G against Adelaide, and we didn't see him again for the rest of the season. And reflecting on that, he's such a proud bloke. Obviously, they all want to play in the seniors. He's an elite level footballer. He's 28, 29. So, he's played a lot of footy. He's a senior player down at the club and super well respected. Of course, he wants to be in the team. Maybe some of that body language was because he never felt confident. He always felt at risk that his place was at risk. And so, maybe that body language betrayed that. But I was really impressed that he didn't spit the dummy at all. And for me, that shows real discipline and real leadership. And I know that Goody puts them really high on his list of important things. He made a point of noting, Gorney talked about getting drilled at halftime by by Goody for, the implication was complaining about head-high free kicks is what Max said after the game. So I was really impressed with the leadership he showed, the role modelling to the younger players. Just went about it. Should have got the free kicks. Didn't complain to the umpires. Didn't portray any negative sort of. Just kept going. And for me, that's as big a tick as any of the other numbers that Royal Demon notes, which are super impressive. Most particularly, as I suggested, you'd be thrilled, George. 5 inside 50 tackles. I would be guessing that's probably a career high. I wouldn't be shocked if that's a career high.
Yeah, I think you'd be absolutely right about that, and that's exactly what we wanted him to do.
Yeah,
apply the pressure, stop looking for the cheapies out the back, and put the work in. And he's been doing that for the last couple of weeks. And you're right. I think he realises that there is potentially a premiership medal sitting in the not too distant future if you keep doing what you've been doing in these couple of weeks. Work hard. Do your job. The results on the scoreboard will come regardless of anything. And like you said, he could have easily had 3 or 4 goals in this game and should have. Yeah. And everybody be singing his praises to the high heavens as a result, because most people just look at the goals and what comes out of it. But it's the hard work. Yeah. The harder you work, the luckier you get.
And they've been talking, like the commentators across multiple, Seven and Fox have been increasingly talking in the last few weeks about the critical importance of players like Aaliyah and Andrews and Core to that intercepting player, which is one of the advantage, by the way, on a separate tack that Melbourne has is we've got multiple intercepting players. We've got May and Lever who can both play that role depending on where other teams rely on a single player who, if you can take them out, if you can blunt Moore and now Murphy out for the Pies, that's a big challenge for any team. And so he's been playing that specific defensive forward role and kicking goals, and now adding that pressure inside 50. That's huge. And he's a lock now, isn't he? Even 3-4 weeks ago, I wouldn't have considered him a lock in that best 22. He's an forgetting he was a lock before Petty's injury. And all credit to him. And just if people I've not heard him speak a hell of a lot, but he's interviewed on SEN. And so if you go to SEN's, the podcast and I think it's the Sporting World. It's the one with Kane Corns and Gerard Healy. There's an interview from last week with Melksham, and it's really interesting because they ask him exactly that question, Andy, about how he's gone as an elite level footballer plying his trade in the VFL and how hard it's been for him to stay focused. And he gives a really honest and direct answer about, in fact, it was extremely hard for him to front up every week and still play at VFL level. So really encourage people to listen to it because I listened to it and thought, well, that's a really impressive fella.
Delightful Play says, what did you think of Joel Smith's game? He had a bad first quarter like most of our players, but seemed to perk up a bit in the second half. Well, Joel, he's been our super sub for the past few weeks, and this week was rewarded with a full game and didn't really trouble the stats keeper with the 7 disposals, 2 marks, but 12 spoils, 6 intercepts, 9 pressure acts and 229 metres gained. Low possessions, but the 12 spoils and 6 intercepts is pretty good for a defender, George.
Except he played half a game up forward.
Yeah.
But it's the same problem I think that Tomlinson's got. He doesn't fit in well with the defensive structures. I remember at one point, I can't remember, there was a North goal and there was a camera shot from behind the goal, and May had tracked his opponent back to the goal square. Joel Smith had lost his opponent, who was out at about the 20 or 30 metre mark. Another North player had scored the goal, but it just told me he's lost. He doesn't know where to go in certain circumstances, particularly in the defensive structures. Again, because we weren't live, I wasn't able to see what was being done with that. I simply recall the last time earlier on in the season when he was playing in the defensive lines, May was constantly into his ear about where he needed to go, and I think that seems to be his big problem. He might get a role up forward this week in the absence of Petty. We can only wait and see. I think he's better structured up forward because he doesn't have to think as much, and I think his presence also causes others. May gets distracted because he's depending on others to do their job. Lever gets distracted because Lever's role's almost a pure interceptor. Lever doesn't have to lock down a player. the whole defensive line looked so much better in the second half. Now, I'm not blaming Joel Smith for that, but I think the addition of Hibbert into the defensive structures in the second half was critical. It's just his Hibbert's ability to be at the contest at the right time, filling his role so that the others can do their job, which is so critical to the rest of us. So, I think Joel should be the super sub, and that's a perfect role for him. You come on and have some effect, be it back, forward, or in the middle of the ground in some way. And I think that's where his future sort of lies more than anywhere else, rather than a specific role.
I 100% agree. And what I'd really like in footy, the footy meet is dominated by ex-footballers, and the sub is seen as a negative role. The players come off, they look distraught when they're the ones who are taken off. Like we talked about a couple of weeks ago with that sub role in basketball. If you're a depth player at NBA level, there's no shame in being a depth player at NBA. That's a specific role. Some players come on and their job is to defend, or their job is to hit 3-pointers for 4 or 5 minutes to give Steph Curry a chop out, or and those players are critical to the best teams, and that's how it should be in footy. His best role is as a sub, and that's how we should play him. Whether that's where he plays this week, I'm not sure. That's where I think he'll be the sub in the finals, and should be. He's brilliant at it. I totally agree on the defensive stuff. One, his footy IQ is enormous. It has to be remembered that he was an elite level Victorian, even Australian representative basketball. He's a junior basketballer, so he didn't get that opportunity for all of that sort of work that junior footballers come through the systems to learn all that defensive stuff. He's exactly the sort of player who would have been a halfback flanker if he'd been just and never played basketball and only a junior footballer. I know he did play some junior footy. But the other thing is that he's been training all season as a forward, or had been until he became in the sub. So, of course, he's not going to know the patterns as well as, a Tomlinson or a May or a Lever or, any of the other regular defenders, because he's been training up forward. And they have to do a lot of work on their defensive systems. If he's not been part of that, of course, he's going to struggle. I don't like him as a defender. But having said that, I thought he's exactly as the question suggested. His effort was fantastic. You can't knock that ever about Smithy, I reckon. And that goes a hell of a long way in any sport, and particularly team sports, because their teammates can see it. Everyone can see it. But yeah, I'm totally with you, George. The zip he brings onto the ground as a sub can be a real tactical edge, I think.
Singer says, another cracking potty last week, guys. Seems we've learned some learnings from 2022 and rested the Bulls and Max in the last quarter, with all of them spending the last 8 to 10 minutes on the bench. I was pretty happy with that, despite the fact that it could cost Track a Brownlow vote or two. Thoughts? Well, George, we had an opportunity to perhaps rest some players for this match, but decided to go in with a relatively unchanged lineup. Once we had the game sewn up, we gave Max, Viney and Track an early knock-off time. What are your thoughts on managing the players in this manner, and what are your expectations in the coming weeks in terms of resting and or managing players?
Does second spot on the ladder become something that's worthwhile defending more so than a fourth spot on the ladder? It's going to be very difficult. Certainly, resting players is critical. We all saw what Geelong did last year. I had a quick look at who they played in round 20 and 21 in particular last year. Round 21, they rested Selwood, Dangerfield, and they had Rowan injured with concussion. So there's 3 of the players who featured strongly in their grand final. Round 20, they had Stanley and Tui out, for example. It worked beautifully for them. They only rested them from a game here or a game there. We probably could have done something in this game, being North Melbourne. Glad we didn't, as it turns out. But we're able to in that last quarter. What was the point of trying to get even another 5, 6, 7, 8 goals? It's going to the percentage factor depends on what other teams do as well, not just us. We got the win that we wanted. We got a comfortable win that we wanted. We finished on second spot. There's still 3 games to go before the finals component, but to be able to rest those players at that point in the game was necessary. I don't think Track would be too worried about losing any Brownlow votes, and I think Gus would have had them in any case.
And it's massive for the season, because this is, I keep thinking, the Pies run at the moment, it's no wonder that they're hitting a bit of a wall, and I think that they'll come out of it. But it feels so similar to our last part of the year last year, in particular our last 3 games of the season. Back in modern footy now, back-to-back tough physical games are just nuts. So to be able to have a chop-out game, even, I'm not disrespecting the Roos, but to use the bench basically to manage loads essentially is what they did in the last. And I talked about the pressure acts before. You can only do that if your other players on the ground step up to the plate, which is one of the things that I really liked about the game. Is the last quarter was really frustrating because we were dominating and we weren't putting it on the scoreboard, but the effort was there. And it was, as I said, Sparrow was number 1 for pressure. Harmsy, Nibbler was on the ground 80%. Viney, Bowie, Brayshaw, Lockie Hunter. Maxi Gorm was only 10 pressure acts way down the bottom of the list. And Harrison Pettior, he came off. Langers only had 12 pressure acts. Lever only had 9. But you can do that. You can, that's partly a function of spending a long time on the bench, obviously. You can't accrue pressure acts on the bench unless you get pressure acts for sledging or something. So I think it was really clever. You've mentioned this a lot of times, George, not so much this year on the podcast, but last year about, using the bench for load management. And it was clearly an opportunity to do that. And it was, as much as anything, it's about thinking about our game against the Blues next week.
What Say What says, 2 questions, both because, like Bidman, I'm annoyed with the football media. 1, why isn't Petrarca ever talked about as being one of the very best players in the competition? All this year we've heard Dacos this, the Bont that, but other than where it counts, i.e. coaches' votes, Petrarca seems to get the short shrift by the media for his incredible influence on games. Why is that? 2, when will Cozzy be recognised for the extraordinary player he's fast becoming? He's heading for his 3rd year of 40-plus goals per season out of 4 seasons in the competition, whilst his defensive work rate is going to a higher level each season. Basically, why do Melbourne players get ignored when compared to those from other clubs? B-Man, the media and their lack of respect for or deficiencies when it comes to accurately analysing the Demons, that's your forte. So I'll let you take this one. Try not to speak all night on it.
No, well, I mean, look, just really brief. I think partly there's a few factors I thought briefly for this. Is one, that the footy media is dominated by ex-footballers. And, I heard Hodge today on SEN. He talked about all of the top teams, all of the contenders. He came, in his opening spiel on SEN, all falling away. He mentioned the Port, losing 4 in a row. Collingwood, 2 in a row. Went all the way down to St Kilda, did not mention Melbourne. Like, of course, it's a slip of the thingo, but like he didn't even take us as a contender. Later on, he fixed it up or whatever. But, it struck me he's an ex-Hawthorn footballer who hated Melbourne. So I think that's an element. I think there's an element of, we've been a team down the bottom for a long time. There's that, we haven't had that, the crowd, or where the perception is that we haven't got the support. We haven't been, TV, a TV favourite through the 70s and 80s and 90s that built, the Carltons and even the Roos that went through that period. I think that's a factor. I wonder, it's a bit hard as a Melbourne fan because I've always thought we're disrespected, but I'm super, alert to it. I wonder whether the Roos think the same and the Dogs think the same. And, I think, do all the other clubs, surely Collingwood fans can't think they're disrespected by the media. I mean, it's been sickening this season, the amount of attention that football clubs got. So, maybe there's definitely a factor of, that confirmation bias again, I think. As for track, I think a big factor is this discussion about Dacos is really interesting because for me, it's actually what they should be talking about is why is one player going out of the team having such an impact in people's thinking about their likelihood of being successful? Like that to me points to a huge structural problem. And a sort of correlated or related sort of notion is him being called the best player in the AFL. I can't begin to tell you how often I've heard so-called analysts, like even Jordan Lewis today I heard on the radio say exactly that he's the best player in the AFL. He is not the best player in the AFL, nowhere near. I mean, come on. Like, he is nowhere near Bont. He's nowhere near Clary. He could get there, absolutely. Like, he's a fantastic footballer, but he's not the best footballer. But you're having people who are seriously saying he's the best footballer. But I think what people get confused on is how important he is to their team. And so going back to track, we've got Clary. I mean, people forget how we've had there would be few people anywhere, any football fan or football person or a pundit would not put Clary in the top 5 players in the AFL. Would either of you guys? I know we're...
He certainly would be, yeah.
Yeah, so, top 5, how much credit have we got for going 8-9 games without our leading goal scorer over the last 3 seasons in Frida not playing, having Clary out for what? How many weeks now? Is he
11 or 12 weeks. You would have told me that at the beginning of the year that he'd be out for that long. I would have jumped out this window.
Yeah. So we can agree Clary's a better player than Dacos. We can manage for 11 games, and our clearance numbers we're averaging like 50 points or something in our last 4 games from clearances. League high. Everyone's talking about Carlton. It's us who are dominating in clearances. There was a question before about it. All without our best midfielder, all without our best extractor. And it's not to bag Dacos. My point is that, but going back, why isn't Track considered the best? It's because he plays with Oliver, and it's because he plays with Maxi, and it's because he plays with Viney. Who does Dacos play with? Pendlebury's an aging star. De Goey is not even in the top. I wouldn't put him in the top 20 footballers. So my point is that it's a relative thing. So Dacos' importance is higher than Petrarca. We can win games without Petrarca. I don't want to. I want Petrarca in the side. And, Clary comes back into it next week. But, there's also the factor of just how much hype that players like Dacos the media want to give him. On Track, I think that he's, he kicks goals now, so he is getting more attention because everyone loves players who kick goal like you, Andy. Everyone loves goal kickers. So pushing forward, he'll get the attention. That's what they say about the Brownlow. So that's where Bontempelli's just unbelievable.
Yeah,
but again, he's by far and away their best player, isn't he? So he stands out in the Dogs team because he is so much better than anyone else in that team, a million miles. We can have a literal debate about who's better between Maxi, Maxi, Clary and Track. They can't have that at Collingwood. So that's my sense. On Cos, I don't know what more information you'd need to, just watch his highlight reel, for God's sake. He is an absolute star. He's tracking way better than Cyril Rioli.
Well, do you want me? I've got the Cyril stats.
Yeah.
So in regards to Cozzy, I guess the player that he is most likely to, and that we would hope that he's going to emulate it over his career, Cyril Rioli. So if you compare the two players in their first 4 years, Cyril played 83 games and Cozzy has so far played 80. So 3 games difference at the moment after the first 4 years. And up to this week, we've got a good base to compare. So Cyril kicked, and what do you know? Where was Cyril primarily playing in his first 4 years? I'm not too.
He was primarily
forward, small forward.
Okay,
yeah, he
all right.
didn't become a midfielder.
Okay,
No,
so
not
that's
till later.
fantastic. Yeah. That's good. So we've got a good base. So Cyril kicked 101 goals, 66 behinds from 1,295 possessions. Okay, so 101 goals, 66 behinds, 1,295 possessions. Cozzy's kicked 120 goals, so 19 more goals, and 81 behinds, and so 15 more behinds from 855 possessions. So he's 440 less possessions, but he's kicked 19 more goals and 15 more behinds.
And I'll bet you London to a brick that he will have almost doubled score involvements than for Cyril.
Yeah, I didn't.
Cyril didn't do score involvements.
Yeah, I didn't go into that, but maybe that's next week.
Yeah, for next week. So I don't know what your guys' take on whether there's a bias against Melbourne, or you're probably better placed, Andy and George, for.
I think it's perhaps simpler than all of that, and it boils down to what sells papers, or whatever they sell these days. When you've got 100,000 Collingwood members, and God knows how many fans that they've got. I know in the old days, certain newspapers in Melbourne used to increase their print rates depending on whether Collingwood won on the weekend or not.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. And the media gets paid by by their organisations to be able to sell newspapers time on television, get the viewers under any circumstances. Most of them would have heard of this bloke called Bontempelli. He is, for me, by far the best player in the competition at the moment.
He's a star, isn't he?
He is an absolute star.
In my top 10 players of all
time. Yeah. I watched him on the weekend. He was absolutely everywhere. The rest of the other 17 players on the field for the Western Bulldogs are just making up numbers around him.
But you know what I mean about the gulf between him and the next best.
And the fact that Dacos is flashy and looks great, and he's going to be a great player. There is no doubt about it. He is nowhere near Bontempelli.
He could be a great player. Let's see how he deals with all this pressure.
But he is nowhere near Bontempelli at the moment. Absolutely nowhere near him. But we just have to put up with it. We'll take the success that we are probably going to see in the near future, and let's see where Dacos finishes in the Brownlow.
I mean, I guess where I get really, I shouldn't, but to be honest, where it really pisses me off is the lack of respect that we don't get for our achievements. Like, we have been by far the dominant team for the last 3 years. Yes, we went out in straight sets last year, but 21 we will flag for the most dominant final period finals for in anyone's memory. People were talking about that. Well, that memory seems to have fallen off a cliff. Collingwood haven't achieved anything, and they're being compared to us. They're being regularly called a great team, Collingwood. Okay, well, they're just simply not. If they're a great team, we are the greatest team, but we're not either. So and what I really get frustrated when that colours Demons fans' perception of Melbourne. That's what really frustrates me, when people don't credit Goody, for his success, or the club or the players. So I do find it frustrating, or have been trying to find it less frustrating.
All right. Wells11 says, this one's for Andy. I'm a fellow MFC SS sufferer, so how the hell do we hold the hope we now have sitting in second spot and everything to play for, alongside the despondency of losing our big power forward? We're both doomed and at a high point at the same time. Now, as the number one ticket holder of the MFC SS club, I can say with certainty, as we sit in second position, with our destiny in our own hands, that we're absolutely doomed. What a terrible position to put ourselves in. We'll surely crumble under the weight of expectation and just our luck. The minute we solved our forward line dilemma, we are once again thrown into chaos. If I was a masochist, I'd be in heaven being a D's fan, but I guess in all seriousness, guys, I'm wrapped with the results of the past few weeks, especially other results have gone our way. Everything's falling into place. Heck, we even got a good result in the Lions Dockers game, which meant we kept pick 4 in our hands and still drained some percentage from Brisbane. So we sit second on the ladder. Our destiny, as I said, is in our own hands. Obviously, I would have liked a bigger percentage boost this week, but I think our draw is more favourable than the Lions. And having said that, I'm absolutely shitting myself this week at the prospect of losing to Carlton. But that's more because most of my mates are Blues supporters, and I might have gone a little overboard last season, contributing to knocking them out of the finals. And I don't want to be hit by the Karma bus or the Kerno bus. So, MFC SS is under control for the moment. So let's see. Hope it stays under control. Casey, disappointingly, there was no Casey game this week, and considering the injury to Petty, the fact that the key forwards who are pressing for selection just didn't get another hit out to show their wares, and it just makes these constant buys in the VFL all the more frustrating. We spoke about that, and something's got to be done. Let's get into changes, and well, it might finally be happening. Goody all but confirmed that Clayton Oliver will make his long-awaited return to the side. We've already discussed our options for the replacement of Harrison Petty, who's looking at an extended stint on the sidelines and may have him pushing to return to the side this season. None of the other injuries on the injury list are likely to return this week. We were speculating with Tom McDonald, but we certainly just don't know that at the moment, so probably can't include him. So Supreme Demon has asked the question on the tip of all of our listeners' lips: who makes way for Clayton Oliver if he hopefully returns this week against Carlton? George, followed by B-Man.
James Harms.
Okay, on to the point. B-Man, you're up early. Harmsy, yep. So there you go. Any other changes either of you see happening this week? Obviously, we've got Harrison Petty.
I personally have... I spent too much time on my Nibbler love letter, and
Also, just get quick.
I have no sense other than I just can't wait to see Clary play footy again. Like I cannot wait to see Clary play footy. And on the Casey game, the next one's at Icon Park, Princess Park. So I'm going to go along to that. It's on Sunday. It's a great ground to watch footy at. So I encourage people to get along to it. But that'll be a really, really interesting game to watch for the finals makeup, I reckon. And fingers crossed, T-Mac. Who knows what 1 to 2 weeks means?
Well, we'll see. 1 to 2 weeks it can end up being 6 weeks. So,
yeah, I think we'll see Grundy coming back in this week. Like I said, Carlton have got 2 proper rucks in Pitnet and De Koning, and I think we're going to need 2 proper rucks rather than trying to get JVR to do the second job. Bowie was interesting to me. He played well, but he got a shoulder injury at some point. It didn't look good at all.
It looked like he was going to have to come off at one stage, and then
and he could be the mystery injury for the week. So, and the other one was whether McVie needs a rest or not. I don't know.
It's too late in the season to rest players.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
And we've got a question about this in a minute because they've got a lot of small forwards, so we can't be taking out two small defenders.
But the other one that I would bring in is leave Hibbert in the main one and use Smith as a sub.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
it's particularly in this game against the Blues because big game. I don't know, the 60, 70, 80,000 people. We need his ability, strength, and physicality, really, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, let's get into our preview for the Blues. But B-Man, I've got a few things to do just before I get to your clip, so I'll get to that in a second. In what is definitely the match of the round, in round 22, the Demons are coming off their 5th straight win, coming up against the rampaging Blues, who are the informed team of the competition. If you listen to the media, coming off their 7th straight win, on their way to those 7 wins in a row, they've knocked off our fellow top 4 competitors in Collingwood and Port Adelaide, and they'll be eyeing off taking another scalp on their way to attempt to make finals for the first time in a decade and the first time legitimately in 12 years. The D's need to win to hopefully retain second spot and keep the dream of a home final in week 1 of the finals alive. Now, we've got a voicemail from Noah from Bentley on a clearer line this week, so I'll play that one.
Hi, this is Noah from Bentley. I haven't watched the game yet, so I assume the positive because my MFCC SS is in the positive. Guys, I'd just like to say I love the podcast. One question I wanted to ask is next week we're playing Carlton, which is probably, I believe, the final team in order for us to beat hoodoo or nervousness in regards to whether we've got the ability to beat the tough teams. Just want to hear the team's opinion on whether they think we can really do a good job on Carlton and the Blues, and whether they think the midfield of Carlton can outstop our midfield, and whether the forward line of Mackay is going to be hard to beat, even with Stevie May and Lever. I'd like to hear the feedback, and just also wanted to ask, or give feedback, now that looks 99% chance of us getting into the finals this year, whether Demonland podcast is considering potentially organising a get-together at a pub for the faithful and loyal Demonland listeners each week so we can watch the game together if we can't get tickets to the finals. Love to hear the feedback on the Carlton game, and as always, go D's.
So Noah, I'll take your voicemail point by point. There's no positive MFC SS. MFC SS is the veil of negativity, so any positives about the D's means...
you could negate the two, a positive, negative.
Yeah. Well, any positive means you're on team positive binners, so pick a lane. We're only taking people in the MFCSS club who live under a dark cloud and have lost all hope. In terms of Carlton being our last tough matchup, I have to respectfully disagree. The Hawks did a nice job on the Magpies this weekend. Mitchell's a smart coach. They're a team with nothing to lose and they'd love to take some scalps going into 2024. Similarly, the Swans aren't done yet. They well and truly could be playing for a finals berth in round 24. They've had a disappointing year from what they're what they would have expected at the beginning of the season, but they're not dead yet. There are no easy games. Just watch the first quarter of this week's match and see what happens if you come out and take a team lightly or don't bring the pressure. And we'll talk more about our matchups with the Blues in a moment, but I'm happy to inform you that Harry Mackay is not playing this week. He's been injured for a number of weeks. So I'm assuming you might have meant Charlie Curnow, and we'll talk more about him shortly. You mentioned that it looks like that we're 90%, 99% chance of making the finals now. Well, I'm the bearer of some fantastic news. We're 100% certain to make finals this season now. You should be getting your club flyer any day in the mail with your ticketing information, and that's a 2017 final series throwback joke for anyone who's playing along. In terms of any Demonland podcast get-togethers to watch matches in the finals, look, if people want to meet up, that's fine. But if we're playing interstate, personally, I'm going to be going to the game, or at least doing everything possible to go. And in any event, I can't watch Demons games with other people in public spaces. I need full concentration on the game because I just get too nervous. So neutral matches are fine, but not D's games. So if I can't be at the game, I'm in my lounge room yelling at the TV in peace. But thanks for your voicemail, Noah. I hope we can answer your questions about the upcoming Blues match now. So, B-Man, do you want me to, before we get into the questions we've got about the Blues match, do you want me to play that clip from
set it up? Because really, for me, it captures the strengths of the Blues and how they've improved. They play a very similar brand of footy to us, I think. But it also does two things. It speaks about the Blues' strengths and the areas of improvement, but it goes back to the point that I was making about two things about the role of the high half forward that Nibbler plays. So when you hear Daniel Hoyne, this is from Champion Data, when you hear him talk about the role, he doesn't mention Nibbler, but he talks about the high half forward role. That's the role that Spargo plays. That's the role in particular that Nibbler plays. And he also talks about transition footy and where it is in modern footy. And he talks about the Blues' improvement in that. When he doesn't, the clip finishes before this, but he goes on to say that the reason he thinks that the Dogs aren't contenders is because they're not strong in this area and that they don't have the sort of players that Nibbler is in that sort of high half forward role. But if you can play the clip, it's a couple of minutes, but it's really good, I think.
Let's get into your 7 main talking points. What have the Blues done to put themselves in the position that they're in, Hoyne?
So the transition game is the game that we continually talk about on this show. And if you haven't got your transition game in order, in terms of having success throughout the season and towards the end of the season, you're not going to be able to generate that.
And for those just joining us, explain the transition game.
So the transition game is your turnover game. So whether that's sort of winning the ball and denying opposition, moving it from one end of the ground to the other, and then when you have the ball, the ability to be able to win it and then be able to punish the opposition going back the other way. So rounds 1 to 10 last year, when everyone's in love with Carlton, it was purely and simply off the back of what they were doing at stoppage. Their transition game was still a below-average transition game in the competition. And then, that was a red flag despite them being 8-2. And then the results took care of themselves. We talk a lot about on this show. It's how you play, not who you play. So their brand of footy at round 10 last year was going okay, but at red flag, that ended up them missing the final series. This last 6 weeks, this is why, if you're a Carlton supporter, it's a far more sustainable brand of footy that you're playing. In terms of punishing the opposition over the last 6 weeks, you're top 5 in the competition. Last year, after round 10, you were 8th in the competition. In terms of denying, you're top 5 again in the competition. Last year, you were 11th. So that was concerning. Your ball movement game was 10th and 13th offensively and defensively last year. It's now top 6 on both sides of the ball. And, we speak a lot about these role players. If you haven't got these high half-forward flankers in your team, the ability to then be able to compete in the transition game makes it so hard. So the last 6 weeks, these aren't going to be household names, but Cottrell has come into the team to play this role. Cunningham has come into the team to play this role. Fogarty has come into the team to play this role. In the first 13 weeks of the year, combined, those players played 1 game in those roles.
And so the role you're talking about is the up and back. Get down to the back flank, transition, block it up, come back, and bring the ball forward with you.
Spot on.
P-Man, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, just that. I think that it really captures where footy's at and the importance. So that question before about are we too stoppage based at the moment, really picks up that very comment, is that when we're at our very best, we are creating turnovers at a half-back flank, and then we're transitioning it up the ground and teams can't stop us. That's why Essendon at the moment is so rubbish, because they cannot stop teams moving it from one end of the ground to the other. It's what West Coast did to them. It was like, a hot knife through butter. But also you've got to deny the opposition's ability to do it. And it's the players like Cunningham and Cotterill and Nibbler and Spargo and the wingers as well, but also all the mids, but particularly those high half forwards who, as Tommy Mack said, as we talked about at the beginning of the season, that's the hardest role in footy, because they've got to run all the way back on defence, and then on offence, when you win the ball, they've got to get ahead of the ball. And beat the ball back into their forward line to provide an option. And basically they do that all day, every day. That's why Nibbler runs, as a half-forward flanker, runs 16, 17 kilometres a game. That's why they weren't winning, because they were such a stoppage-based team, the Blues. So I think that's the other thing that's really interesting about the Blues, because people still are talking about the Blues as a stoppage team, and that stoppages are their one wood. And his point is that's no longer the case. And footy's moving away from a stoppage game to a transition game and ability to, as he said, deny the opposition's ability to transition and to take advantage and move it quickly when, at the best teams like we are. And we are the best. And so in those two metrics, he didn't say this, but they're the metrics now for the ones that the teams who win flags are in they deny the opposition's ability and they score on transition. I think they're number one for turnover now, which is amazing, and scores from turnover. We're number two, or it might be vice versa. So that's why they present a significant challenge to us. The advantage we do have is that they've got Walsh and Sierra out of their midfield, and we've got Clary coming back into it. We do have a major advantage over most teams. They've got an excellent midfield. They've done fantastic, a bit like us in the last 6 weeks. They've done brilliantly to overcome their outs in the midfield, particularly Walsh. But we've got an advantage in that space. But the game will be won and lost by which team is better on denying the opposition's ability to transition and to maximising transition scores when we've got it, or they've got it. That's where the game will be won and lost.
So he mentioned that they've got three players that are currently sort of playing that role. We've currently got the one, that high half forward.
Spargo, that's the thing about Spargo. But the other players have to do it. That's what Wowie's role was. When Wowie was in the team, he was playing that high half forward role. Chandler's had to do a bit of those kilometres. So, if Spargo doesn't come in, someone else has to cover the kilometres. Maybe two or three players have to cover the kilometres. And it's as simple as that. Like he mentioned those three players didn't play at all. Remember, they lost 6 games on end, Carlton. And it wasn't until they brought in those high half forward transition running players that they've now strung 6 in a row together. So basically, but also Langers and Hunter are the other two. They run the same sort of kilometres as Nibbler does. Spargo is a bit closer to goal, but he still plays that role, which is why I think they're building his tank to come in, and I'm really confident he'll come back into the team, but may be proven wrong. But if I am, other players will have to collectively pick up that slack.
A Demonian asks, but the Blues turnaround in form coincided with them losing Mackay, and it was to the benefit of Charlie Curnow, who has been sensational and will probably take out another Coleman medal. I think our defence can account for Curnow, or at least keep him to a couple of goals and not let him run rampant. What I'm more concerned about is their small forwards, who have been having a little purple patch during their run of 7 wins. Motlop, Martin and Owies have all hit the scoreboard in recent weeks. Motlop 10 goals, Martin 8 and Owies 7. As we are all too aware, we are at our most vulnerable once the ball hits the deck in defence, and I'm very worried about this mosquito fleet. Who takes who? B-Man, you has a guess of who's likely?
I'm not sure, but that is 100%. It's been our Achilles heel over the last couple of seasons, but McVee's made a big difference, I reckon, and Bowie and Salo's playing well. So I think McVee, I'm not sure about the exact matchups, but I agree with George wholeheartedly that Hibbard's going to be important, because he's going to be able to play in multiple roles. He can take those smaller players, Hibbard, and can also, he plays tall as well. McVee, that's why I don't think we can afford to have McVee out of this team. So I'd be very surprised if he gets dropped. And Salem is obviously another one. And Bowie, he picks them up the one that, we've talked about a few times, Rivers is really a utility player. He sort of plays a bit of the opposite role to Nibbler in the way he's, it's also those halfback flankers have to run on offense as well. So that I think that's a really good point. That will be critical, our ability to shut those players down. But I'm not sure what you think, George. And it feels like we've improved in that space quite a bit this year, whether that's a system thing or a player thing. But McVie certainly had something to do with it, I reckon.
Yeah, he's certainly filled a gap that was there last year in particular. I'm not as worried about Carlton as what other people are. I watched their game against St Kilda, and the Saints took it right up to them effectively until about the last 15 minutes in that game, and they got a couple of fortunate goals, and the Saints ran out of tank. And I reckon the same thing will happen to Carlton. It was a really high pressure game in this one,
it was.
And having played
half, it was
having played Collingwood the previous, we saw what happened to Collingwood this week. I reckon Carlton will have spent a lot of their tickets just to getting where they are at the moment. We talk about Charlie Curnow now, or
So I'll just get Supreme Demon asks, who do we play on Blue Star forward? Charlie Curnow, Joel Smith, or do we bring back Adam Tomlinson? I'm sure not going to get an affirmative there from George.
Negative to both of those. I think May will do a simple job on him. I had a look at the St Kilda game again. Callum Wilkie basically played most of the time on him. Wilkie had 23 disposals. Curnow had 10. Curnow got a single goal for the whole game. Curnow only took 6 marks. Wilkie took 10. May's the perfect player to match on Curnow. Carlton depended almost totally on those 3 small forwards to kick them the goals in this game, and a couple from their mids. But Curnow, if he's challenged physically, which May is capable of, I think he'll really struggle in this game.
Who else do they have before you go, Big Man? Who else do they have in the forward line? Do we need to worry? Do we need a third tall?
Well, that was what I was just going to say. Is that there's been a lot of talk. Is that are they actually better with McKay not playing because it frees up Curnow? And it's a bit of a funny thing about cause and effect. Oh, they've been winning without him, and Curnow's got off the chain a couple of times. But one of them was against West Coast. I forget the next game he kicked some goals as well. Yeah, but as George said, he didn't kick goals last week. They double teamed him. They ran 2 players on him, including Wilkie, and eventually he had to go up the ground. And May is perfect for him, because if they drag May up the ground, well, he's more dangerous up the ground. May, we want him high because he can, he's more dangerous high. But if they drag him back to the goal square, the problem with McKay being out is exactly your point, Andy. They don't really have. I mean, they've got De Koning who goes forward.
Yeah, leans forward, and Pitternet occasionally. Yeah,
but Pitternet's got a busted. He's looking like he's a wounded soldier. So he's looking banged up like some of our players last year. The problem with McKay out is that we don't have to worry so much about the second tall anymore. We can play Hibbo on a. He could take De Koning at a pinch. He's not going to, but if he ends up on that matchup, he gets isolated on him, he can manage him. So I think it's a problem for them not having McKay. I don't think he's coming back either.
No.
I don't ascribe to the theory they're better off without him, because exactly that reason is they can't stretch defences in the way they can with both of those players in.
Radelaide says, looking at Carlton's injury list, they have half their midfield out for this match. Walsh, Chera and Kennedy are 3/4 of their engine room. With those outs, how can they possibly match it with our midfield, especially if Clary is back? Thanks for the podcast, guys. It truly is the highlight of my footy week after a win. Bin Man?
As I said, I mean, like at some point or other, all things being equal, on Saturday night, they've got Chera out, they've got Walsh out. Their midfield has been doing good, and it's definitely one of their strengths. But as we talked about before, it's importantly for them, it's not the strength that it was. Because their transition game is so much better. So that pace and running and running off halfback flank. But at some point or other, they're going to come up against Maxi, Track, Clary and Viney at a centre clearance. Like that is one of the greatest midfields in Melbourne Football Club history right there. So, we're clearly going to have an edge. And as I said, in the last 3 games, people talk about Collingwood, but we had 54 points against the the Crows from clearances, 50 or 48 against the Tigers and 54 again on the weekend. So we are scoring from clearances. I think the question before is a good one about we want to get our turnover going. Our numbers aren't so bad, but we can match them in both spaces. So, and of course, Maxi, a bit will depend a bit on Maxi's role and whether Grundy comes back in, I guess, George. But, that's an impressive midfield, and it's got to give us advantage. Logic says it's got to give us an advantage, doesn't it?
Yeah, Cripps is not what he used to be. He's he only got 24 possessions, I think, this week, and he simply wasn't as effective as what he has been over the last couple of years.
And he's thin down. He's not the power player that he quite was, because he has to be that running transition player. That's the thing, is that 400-metre style runner.
Yep.
Well, let's get, George, you wanted to, last week you talked about some of the inclusions to our AFLW team, and this week you wanted to discuss our draw for the upcoming AFLW season, so take it away.
Yeah, we spoke about the team last week. Unfortunately, the AFL has not given the AFLW the respect that it deserves, and when they've now got 18 teams and they've only fixtured 10 matches for the season, a couple of things that have come out of that is that we'll finish, and with the way the fixture's been set up, the top teams are playing each other more than what they play the bottom teams, and the result will be at the end of the season. I will absolutely guarantee this, the same as when they ran the two conferences with the best teams in one conference and the poorer ones in the other, is that you'll finish up with teams playing in the finals that really shouldn't be there, or you'll have these ridiculous blowouts in the finals. It's just incomprehensible what they've done. The other thing that really annoys me is that they've allocated the games to all sorts of odd and sundry places like Frankston, Warrnambool, Norwood, GMHBA, Arden Street, Tasmania, Windy Hill, the Whitten Oval, Victoria Park, Alberton, Ballarat. After the Commonwealth Games debacle, I don't think you need to stretch the imagination too much to realise that when you start playing at regional centres, you don't get the exposure, you don't get the crowd numbers, you don't promote the game in the same way as what you would is if, for example, it was being played in Melbourne.
You risk injury because of substandard.
Exactly, absolutely, yeah. And what really, really annoys me is that the season starts on the 1st of September and finishes around about the 5th of November. In that period of time, with finals towards the end of November, it'll finish. In that period of time, apart from the announcement this week of a Paul McCartney concert at Marvel Stadium, there was only one other concert planned for mid-November at Marvel. Marvel is unoccupied for that whole period. Now, why wouldn't you play football as a game at the ground that the AFL now owns in good conditions under a roof where you're not going to have to play in windy, wet, whatever else might be thrown at these players? We want to see a spectacle.
And perfect dimensions for women's football because it's slightly smaller than the G.
Absolutely, yeah. And the television, the people on the television would be grateful for, certainly for not having to move their camera crews around all over the place, but they want to see a spectacle as well if they're going to put it on the television. You're going to have some awful results as a result of the way this has been set up.
And low scoring, George, and then we have to put up with the rubbish about women's football. Where's it's too low scoring. It's just such an inevitable.
Here was a big chance to promote the game, to push it and get some real traction with the supporters, and particularly during the quiet period in that October-November period when it's before the cricket starts, and they've completely blown it. It's not surprising given all the other failings around the AFL at the moment. They've only just recently appointed a full-time football manager for the first time this year. So there's a whole series of problems that they've got that they haven't solved. They still haven't got the CBA sorted out for how much they're paying the players, which is, again, reprehensible for the women who are part-timers. They need to know how much they're earning and when they're going to play. They only announced the competition barely a month ago. It's just a complete debacle that they've created out of this. The good thing from our perspective is, like I spoke about last week, we've got a really strong list and what sounds like a very healthy list as well, and a few of the players that are coming back into the side who were unavailable because of injury last year are now available to us. So it's going to be hard to go back to back, but I think we've got the right team to be able to do that.
And funnily enough, unlike the men, we probably do get, not that we get masses of media for women's footy, but we probably get pretty relatively good coverage because we were one of, with the Dogs, we were one of the, the first clubs and we've won the flag. Obviously, Daisy Pearce is a big factor in that. So, I 100% agree, George. I think the AFL have just, it's so disrespectful for women's footy and it's also so short-sighted.
Yeah. And while we're broadcasting tonight, there's 80,000 people watching a women's match in Sydney. Admittedly, it's got the interest of two different countries, but there's 80,000 people watching a game of women's football, different sort of football. Now, so you present it, give it the right format, give it the exposure that it needs, give it the respect it needs, and look what you can achieve.
Absolutely. Yeah, well said.
All right, well, I think we're going to leave it there for tonight. We'll be back next week, hopefully discussing another famous victory on the big stage at the MCG. If you want to listen to the show live, then please head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at 8:30 p.m. Thank you to our 5-star reviewers on Apple Podcasts. Thank you to Delightfully Insightful, Buff and Jono. Thank you to our Facebook commenters, Trent S. and David Y. Thank you to our voicemailers, Dan and Noah. Thank you to our caller, Kieran from Canberra. Thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to Oh My D's, Red Jacket, Delightful Play, D-Mania since 56, Go Lordy, Buck Naked, Gaundy, The Great, Smurf, Lazy, Travi 14, El Diablo 14, Supreme Demon, Pew Pew Pew, Scroll, Sam 6172, Bigfoot, Royal Demon, Singer, What, Say What, Wells 11, D Minion and Radelaide. Thank you to my co-hosts George and Bimman, and thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from, and we'll read it out on next week's show. And don't forget to check out our YouTube channel to watch the show. Just search Demonland Podcast, and please like and subscribe. See you next week. Go Demons.
Red Leggers.
Come on, Demons. Come on.